But overall, boat crossings are down quite significantly year on year, so that does suggest that the plan is working.
We've just witnessed drone footage of the French authorities handing out life jackets to...
In relation to this, and let's remember, of course, the numbers can fluctuate, but overall, boat crossings are down quite significantly year on year, so that does suggest that the plan is working.
We've just witnessed drone footage of the French authorities handing out life jackets to illegal immigrants and then waving them goodbye as they head on their way towards the UK. So the French are actively helping and facilitating illegal immigration. In addition to that, the French forces did nothing to stop that huge migrant dinghy. In fact, the dinghy came out, then it went back to the beach to pick up even more illegal immigrants and then departed for a second time. During all of that, the French did nothing, and they even handed out life jackets and waved goodbye as these illegal immigrants head towards the UK. I think that's terrible. I mean that anyone who did cross the channel and arrive in Dover could be immediately deported within around about a week.
Give that a second, he's just dragging a line by the look of it.
Is that a warning shot towards us? I don't know.
Well, I was trying to work it out.
Okay. The French officers could clearly see we were conducting an interview on the back of the fishing boat. They sailed extremely close to us and started firing gunshots, 11 live rounds. We could see the bullets hitting the water behind our boat. They weren't firing before their approach. They weren't firing afterwards. There was no notification of any kind of training exercise. So it did seem to me to be an effort to intimidate us.
The thing that I find, and I should say alarm clock Brits find so frustrating, Chris, and this is why I wanted you on this morning. Yesterday, finally, the unelected Messiah of Manchester stood up and said, to consummate fury from most of us, that Labour's plan to stop dinghy migrants is working. This, Chris, despite the fact that 1,000 illegal migrants have still come into this country in the last 9 days since he became Prime Minister.
Je suis un député dans le Parlement du Royaume-Uni. Why have you allowed the migrants into the water? Why haven't you stopped them?
Our order.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DB Plus Radio or watching on YouTube, fabulous to have your company. If you missed anything from the show, or frankly, a rip-roaring show on Monday, do go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Hit subscribe and you never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, we are going to be discussing the early prison release scheme. We're also going to be talking about Andy Burnham going off on holiday 2 weeks after getting the top job in the country. France, not too happy about reforms plans to return the boat migrants to them. They say the proposals would violate their sovereignty and breach international law, for which I will give a Gallic shrug. And also, of course, very sad news announced yesterday that Rod Liddle, the legendary, he is legendary columnist for the Sunday Times and the Sun, the Spectator, a former editor of the Today programme, if you could imagine that now, he's died after a short illness at the age of 66, which is far too young. We'll be paying tribute to him. Tom Slater, I'm delighted to say, is joining me for the show today, editor of Spiked Online. Morning. Morning, Julie. Great to have you here. Lots to talk about with you. We always put out a question on social media, and obviously, as you know, you get to choose what else you want to talk to us about, if anything else. But I've got a question today, and it's, is Andy Burnham right to block the early release of rapists and child sex offenders, as he has announced, but allow killers, those committed manslaughter, convicted of murder, are not eligible for this early release scheme, to walk free from prison early? So that's the question I'm putting to you. I'll give you the numbers now, but it's another question I think I'd rather put, which I think perhaps more accurate. But give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the National Rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. But when I saw this story, and I think, you know what? Absolutely, I don't want rapists. I don't want child sexual abusers. I don't want child groomers. I do not want these men, so they all are. I do not want them released early from prison. Good decision by Andy Burnham. But killers are going to be allowed to walk free early. They include the killers, two of the killers of PC Andrew Harper, as we know, the police officer dragged to his death behind a car. The man who was driving the car is convicted of murder. He's not eligible for early release. He has to go to a parole board and he'll be serving longer. However, when I saw this story, I don't understand the logic of, well, we definitely don't want rapists and child groomers out on the street early. They need to serve their, they know it's serve their full term, but a longer part of their term. But the idea that people who have killed people. So my real question to the audience and to Tom, and not to be glib, if these were the only two options available to you, to happen to you or to a loved one, to your child, to your wife, to your mother, OK, would you rather be raped or killed? Because I'm pretty darn sure that in any scenario, if those were the only two options, I would choose being raped for any member of my family or myself over being killed. You know, horrific, horrific crime, but still alive, still able to live your life. And yet we're saying that killers should be released early and rapists not. It doesn't make sense to me. What on earth is this policy about?
No, I agree. I think what we've seen from Andy Burnham here is the most grim form of triangulation we've seen yet on a particular policy, which is to say, of course, we can't go the whole hog and do what is obviously morally necessary, which is to keep people who not only have raped and abused but also killed people off of the streets, because they are clearly a danger to life.
Almost like there was a reason why they were in prison in the first place, Tom.
Exactly. But you know what? We'll do these half measures. We'll pick the part of it which is maybe the most emotionally resonant at this point in time, and then act as if this doesn't make any difference. But
Yeah,
given the
that's
fact
the key.
you've got the case of PC Harper across the headlines, given the fact
Week after week.
this is what has led the debate. So in that context, it doesn't even make political sense to make this very grim determination to say yes, rapists and sex abusers are going to be kept behind bars, but the very same people who again led to that horrific killing are going to be released earlier.
I mean,
it
it
makes
is
no
just,
sense.
but it's just extraordinary. It's very, very obvious to me that we've had, obviously, the victims of rape and grooming gangs. We've had this very much in the news. This has dogged Andy Burnham throughout his bid to become Prime Minister. People pointing out that he was, as Mayor of Manchester, did very, very little. Some say even obstructive in trying to bring the cases to light in Manchester and deal with the failures of Manchester authorities to deal with rape gangs. And so that's resident in the news. And, of course, you've got these, I've got to be honest with you, just awesome young women, just extraordinarily strong, brave young women who have been, ignored. These girls have been groomed and many of them have been, betrayed by their own parents in the first place, failed by their parents, failed by the schools, failed by their care homes, abused, beaten, raped, some threatened, horrific things that have happened throughout their lives. And then when they went to the authorities, basically derided as, slags and sluts and whores who didn't really matter that they were being raped. They've gone through all of that, and now they are speaking to us on our televisions and our radios, and they are saying, they are telling their stories, and people are hearing them and demanding justice. And these are some of the bravest young women you've got ever encountered in the world. And they're a danger, they're a risk to this government because they're going to speak out. But I'm guessing, people who are dead, they can't speak out. And you've got very, very sympathetic people such as Lissy Harper, the widow of Andrew Harper, and Andrew Harper's mother as well, Debbie Adam, speaking out. But it's not the same as perhaps these victims. It seems to me this is a decision made by Andy Burnham that is purely about PR, focus group, what people are most upset about, as opposed to doing the right thing. Because here's the thing, this is what I don't get. OK, you've got a population of almost 90,000 in the prison estate. So around 85,000 is men in this prison estate, a bit more than that. 12% of those, by the way, are foreign nationals. An awful lot of them Albanians, who, by the way, we've got an exchange deal with them, but they could just go to jail in Albania, so they'd still serve their time. I'd rather they serve their time, and I imagine Albanian jails are rather less cushy than ours. You've got about 30% of prisoners are in for violence or sex offences. So why are we letting out anyone who's committed a violence or sex offence? Why aren't we only letting out people who haven't committed those offences if we need to free up some spaces? Rape and child offences are about 23%. Those who've killed is about 10%. But most of those are murderers who aren't eligible. There's only 1,000 men behind bars for manslaughter. So you didn't have... That's not going to make the biggest difference to freeing up spaces. I just think this is just totally and utterly unnecessary. And again, we're looking at men in this case. So the killers and rapists would have been eligible. Rapists would have been eligible to reach halfway through their sentence. It used to be 2/3, which is bad enough, halfway through. And if you're a lower level criminal, but by the way, enough of a criminal you got sentenced to go to prison, so you're either a massive repeat offender or you have committed a serious crime, serving as little as 1/3 rather than 40% of your crime. Our prison sentences are beyond a joke. They are just outright lies. The sentences we are serving are ridiculous, and these people are going to be out on the streets. There's no requirement that they've been rehabilitated. There's no requirement that they have admitted their crimes or that they have regretted their crimes and they want to make amends. There's no evidence for any of this at all. These people are going to be a danger and they're going to be out on our streets sooner than they should be.
No, exactly. This is just sort of technocratic spreadsheet politics at its most absurd. I mean, it's saying that, well, because we have an issue with prison places, therefore we're going to have to allow out a large number of them, even quite dangerous and violent ones, early. It's a kind of computer says no response, rather than looking at, you know, we have to take as read the fact that if someone gets a sentence, a hefty sentence, that has to mean something, rather than taking as read the fact that the primary responsibility of the state is the protection of its own citizens. Rather than starting from that place, it's like, well, there aren't enough spaces, so therefore we need to move them on. You could have a discussion about standing up temporary prison accommodation, something that I know Reform have raised as well as
Nightingale prisons,
Exactly. Why?
For the low-level, low-risk, low-violent offence, of which there are plenty.
Exactly. And then in the meantime, that would give you the space to get the funds together and potentially pass legislation to allow for the building of more prisons. Surely that would be a more sensible answer, but it's the same kind of thinking that you get from the Labour Party, which is to say, oh, people are really upset about the migrant hotels, so let's move them into HMOs.
So we
will
don't
solve
see
the
them.
problem. Again, you're just shuffling the problem around.
Not identifying the actual problem is that we don't want these people here. And we definitely don't want them walking among us.
Another parallel was the fact that, you know, in a sense, I'm sure most people would prefer illegal migrants to be held up in a hotel on the edge of town rather than on their street. So again, it's one of those things which clearly is just about politicking, about moving the numbers around, and also, let's face it, taking the public for mugs. Do people look at this and think, oh, I'm so much more relieved because he's keeping the paedophiles and rapists in, should have gone without saying, but the killers are going to be walking among us within a matter of weeks.
Absolutely.
Is that really going to reassure anyone?
Andy Burnham has written a piece for The Telegraph. He wrote, the truth is, he said, even after listening to victims' concerns, rapists and child sex offenders would not be eligible for the sentencing changes, but killers would. He goes, the truth is, I wanted to go even further. I know there will be concerns about who will still be released early for other offences. I've pushed to the very limits of what is possible to do. That's simply not true. He says, I know I can look people in the eye and say to them there is nothing more I could have asked for without risking the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing within months. Such an outcome would expose the public to enormous risk. Police would be unable to make arrests, courts would be unable to send new offenders to prison, our justice system would grind to a halt. All this is the reason why sentencing changes were rightly introduced in the first place. But I'm sorry, that is not the case. There are very obvious options. Removing foreign nationals, very, very easy. Freeing a load of women prisoners. Now, I'm not one of these people who goes, oh, women shouldn't be in prison anyway. You commit a crime, you should go to prison whether you're a woman or a man. I've got no issue with this at all. Vast majority, though, are for non-violent offences. I think it's a choice. Again, choices. Raped or killed. I think we'd go raped, right? Horrific crime. Not in any way diminishing it. Not being glib. But in terms of the two options given to me at any moment, I would know which one I would choose, and we know which one everyone would choose. OK, choice between freeing a non-violent female offender, I don't know, haven't paid the TV licence, love, got fined, didn't pay the fine, freeing her or freeing somebody who has killed. I don't know. Is that a difficult debate to have? Given there are a number of female prisons, but there are far fewer female prisons, would you not just clear out one entire female prison, move prisoners? I know it's not ideal. None of this is. And then put the non-violent male offenders into the women's prison. That would seem an obvious thing. Building the Nightingale prisons, not beyond the wit of man. I mean, they built one in, 8 days in Florida under Trump? OK, open outdoors. OK, maybe it doesn't work quite so well with our temperatures. I don't think it's beyond the wit of man. I really don't. I don't think anything this is. Have you heard of ported cabins? Put fences around? I'm sorry. This is all completely possible. So when the Prime Minister says, this is the limits of what we can do, this is simply not true. This is not thinking out of the box. As you say, it's a computer says no.
Yeah, and it's actually a continuation of the big issue that we've had over prisons and the state of the prison estate and the lack of political interest in it is that in particularly quite fiscally constrained times, it's unfortunately not the most... It's not an issue that any Prime Minister wants to earmark a hell of a lot of money and resources
I tell you what, and I've said it to Prime Minister after Prime Minister to their face, if you want to put my taxes up to build more prisons, I'm more than happy. And by the way, this ridiculous statistics you get from all the lefty do-good and lanyard-wearing nutters who say, we have more people per head of the population in prison than anywhere else other than America in a Western country. This fact is true, but do you know why? Because we have more crimes per head of the population. And one of the problems we've got is that people don't go to prison until they've committed a lot of offences or a very serious offence. You know, which is why so many of our offenders are actually serious, violent offenders who are behind bars. I mean, I'm sorry, but prison serves a purpose, and one of the purposes it serves is to punish, and one of the purposes it serves is to keep people off the streets so they can't commit other crimes. It is as simple as that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. What do you make of the Prime Minister jetting off on holiday with his family? Now, as you know, quite a big fan of the family holiday. Not going to lie. I mean, and again, I've defended. I think I've defended Keir even for my sins, I've defended Keir Starmer, I think, in the past. Like, people are allowed to go on holiday. People also have families and they have marriages and people need to spend time together. And I consider family holidays to be, you know, whether you're sitting at home together, whether you know, we used to go on holiday, we, you know, self-catering in, you know, in bunk beds in Cornwall, or whether you're off to your glam 5-star hotel in the Maldives or whatever. But holidays are really good for families and really good for relationships and kids and things, and it matters. Would I campaign for and take the top job in the country as the Prime Minister of, frankly, one of the greatest countries on earth? I don't care what they try and do to damage us. We are still one of the greatest countries on earth. And then go off on holiday 2 weeks later. Even allowing for he's got kids of school age, they're at school holidays. I get all of that. Really, though, 2 weeks into taking the job, should it be going away?
I know it's one of those, like you, in general times, I wouldn't get too excited or upset about people taking holiday.
Well, Prime Minister also, something's always going to happen, but you're allowed to take a holiday.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately these days something always seems to be happening, not least because the geopolitical picture is so much more mixed up. There's always a crisis, there's a war, there's an airstrike, and there's calls to say, why is Keir Starmer or Andy Burnham sunning themselves while the world is on fire? That being said, just on the basis of simple political calculation and thinking, I'm new in the job, to do this straight away will look bad, maybe wife and kids go without me and we'll make up the time later in the year. That would just seem a sensible move. Maybe I'll pop along for a long weekend. Exactly. But of course, as we all know, it's not as if he's going to be there totally switching off. I mean, he's no doubt going to be working almost as hard as he would be if he was here. Yeah. But the optics of it are not great.
And again, you'd think that he would know this. And also the fact that the person he leaves in charge is his first Secretary of State, unofficially effectively the Deputy Prime Minister, Louise Haigh. And I'm sorry, small point worth making, convicted fraudster.
Yep.
She's basically the most senior person running our country while he's away. I do think that's a point worth making. By the way, everyone keeps saying, well, we shouldn't, you know, suspend conviction. The reason she lost her job in the last government as a Transport Secretary wasn't because she had a conviction for fraud. It was because she lied about having one. If you get a job as a forklift truck driver, as a clean street sweeper, as a secretary, as a doctor, whatever job you do, if you lie on your application form, you've committed gross misconduct and you can be sacked, which is what happened to her. I don't understand what the problem is, but also voters have a right to know these things. You know, you've seen this move yesterday. This law that actually, you know, cabinet ministers will not have publicly have their convictions made public to the country. Sorry, but when you stand to be an MP, you know, you're making a job application. We have a right to know full information. And I think most people would say, well, actually, that's not going to be an issue for me. You committed a crime when you were a teenager or, not when you were 20s, or, you know, silly indiscretion. It might be in a pub fight or something. Do you know what I mean? I think most people are pretty reasonable, but not if you lie about it.
No, and that is the core of it with Louise Haigh. I mean, it wasn't the conviction itself, although the fact that she committed this fraud quite well into her adult life, shall we say, in quite a hapless fashion, it looks like, doesn't necessarily reflect well on her as an operator, let alone as a moral human being. But this thing about it, as you say, this is not to throw everyone under the bus because they might have made some mistakes when they were younger. Of course, people can redeem themselves. I think you just need to be more upfront about that in order to earn that redemption, particularly if you're seeking public office, holding public office. You're going to be held to account. So I think this is such a kind of phony.
Yeah, do you really think it won't come out? Yeah, absolutely. Now, listen, where are you on this Reform Restored vote? We had this big announcement from Reform yesterday, totally led all the news all day yesterday, about basically, you know, just turning back the Channel boats, using the Royal Navy, and just, you know, France can either agree to take them at a port or we'll just deliver them to the beaches. Effectively, you know, we'll land troops on French beaches. We should do this if France refuses migrants. France has basically said, you know, this would be a breach of our national sovereignty. You know, no. But meanwhile, with this ongoing battle between Reform's leader Nigel Farage and Restore's Rupert Lowe, after Rupert Lowe put out this 12-minute video the night before basically saying, let's do a pact, but with 5 provisos, one of which was you'll have to dump all your Tory defectors. They can't be in the cabinet. Knowing full well that Nigel Farage could never agree to that. And Nigel Farage sort of made some, you know, he didn't sort of dismiss it out of hand. It was sort of, you know...
A few sly digs, but that's to be expected.
But then afterwards, and again, I was taking the mick on air about it was like 13-year-old girls having a spat, because Rupert then put out a statement saying, oh, you know, no, he said he'd call me, he said he'd call, but he didn't call, and it was totally like, oh, and then Janet said, and then Natalie said, and I said, so I said to her, so I said. So, you know, and it was genuinely embarrassing. But, you know, this ongoing issue, where do you stand on it?
I mean, the whole spectacle has been quite unedifying from the off. And when that 12-minute video was put out by Rupert Lowe over the weekend, I mean, there is an offer that you can't refuse and there's an offer that you can't really accept. And it kind of fell into the latter category because, of course, it was presented as reaching across and
olive branch,
working together and what have you. But not only were some of the demands that it would be kind of impossible for Nigel Farage to accept. It would also kind of implicitly suggest that by saying we will take, say, your mass deportation policy wholesale, it's implying that they don't have a policy of their own, which they do.
Yeah.
It would imply that they are not...
and Nigel Farage has been very clear that it's about what you can practically do, as opposed to...
The principle.
I mean, the principle is absolutely, if you're here illegally, you should be, whether you're a man, woman or child, you should be deported. Are you realistically going to be able to do that? Now, I would like to try, but I think one should prioritise the people we really want to get rid of, and he's talking about 600,000 as the key priority.
And I think on both sides this is mainly playing to their own respective audiences rather than anything serious.
And anything like a public overture as opposed to private talks.
Well, this is it. Yeah, if this was something where via intermediaries talks were happening, we found out about this because someone in the know told someone at a newspaper, it'd be a very different kettle of fish. But this is something that's going on in public and is playing to, I think, their respective audiences or just voters on the right in general. Because one of the criticisms which is levelled at both parties from time to time is that you're letting personalities get ahead of the country,
egos.
That you need to put country ahead of party, egos and so on and so forth. Neither of them want to be seen as that character. So they're having to engage in this pantomime,
also,
even though ultimately I could be amazed if they
if you're looking at some sort of future coalition or pact, I mean, you know, again, Restore saying, no, you know, no one's going to get elected if we don't have a pact. But you're the reason why you're taking the Reform votes. The smaller party is the one that should stand down at that point. But also, if there's a realistic prospect of power, and at the moment, currently, we're not looking at polls suggesting a Reform majority. You're looking at the majority, you know, forming a coalition with. Well, it ain't Restore, is it? They're unlikely to have anyone other than, you know, Rupert Lowe as an MP, in which case you're looking at working with the Tories. And, you know, somebody says, well, I won't work with the Tories. Well, who would you choose? It's almost... Again, my biggest issue with Rupert Lowe, I think he's a very sharp man. I think he's saying a lot of very sensible things. I do not like a lot of the people who are supporting Rupert Lowe. I don't have any time for anyone who's bringing Tommy Robinson in from the cold. And I'm sorry, you can call up and shout at me as much as you want. From what... The stuff that I know, I wouldn't have anything to do with the guy. It's as simple as that. But the key thing is that, you know, Rupert, it's so much of it is ego and some of the choice. But you simply cannot have a situation where, you know, you're basically splitting the vote between 3 parties on the right. Labour will just walk into another government, and they'll work with the Greens if necessary, they'll work with the Lib Dems, they'll do anything to stay in power. And at the end of the day, do you want to do the right thing? I have no party allegiance. People are always being told by people, oh, you're Tory, or you're Reform, or you're this, that. I care about the country. I care about people who are not as lucky as me in life and who need help. And I don't mean a 20-year-old with anxiety on a Monday morning. I mean people who genuinely need help and people whose lives are massively impacted by dumb and dangerous decisions made by governments. And I think that's where most of my audience are in terms of what we care about. I want my country to be strong and safe, and people who are vulnerable to be taken care of, and for people who can make a good way in life to be able to do their bit and live their best lives, but also make a contribution. I think that's what matters. I couldn't care less which ego is in charge. I couldn't care less which colour rosette it is. I just want people who will do the job properly. And so I volunteered my services. If and when, you know, I will, because I just think it's so important we get the job done. And with all this bickering, I mean, frankly, I want to go in and I want to slap everybody involved.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. And it's one of those things where, putting aside all other considerations, what it is that they're supposed to stand for, some of the unsavoury elements that are circling around Restore Online, the best case scenario for them was always to be a spoiler party for reform. That was, they were, you know, despite some of the feverish talk on X or elsewhere that they were going to form the next government, never going to happen. So,
well, they believe their Twitter accounts rather than their X accounts.
On the other side, of course, no party is owed votes from any section of the electorate. And I think it's been a reminder to reform that complacency is a killer, especially if you're an insurgent party, especially if you're going from a position of, you know, 5 MPs at the last election, grown a few more, lost a few, grown a few more since then.
It always seems to end up at 5.
Yeah, you have to consolidate your vote, and that was the one, that was the primary task ahead of reform, was making sure that broadly speaking, the right-wing vote of this country coalesces around them. That's something that they have failed to do with the remaining Tory vote so far. And it's also something that they're now facing a new challenge on their right via Restore.
Absolutely.
So that should at least sharpen minds. But I think you're absolutely right. And this is something that the right hasn't always been very good at. Although previously during Brexit there was a recognition that, you know,
yeah,
those
but again,
Brexit
Nigel
Party
Farage
MPs had
stood
to be
aside
down.
for Boris Johnson, and then look what happened. You know, that's the reality. Can we just finally, before we go to break and calls, talk about Rod Liddle? I actually found out while I was on air yesterday that Rod Liddle had died, but not all family members had been notified because he works, you know, for the Sunday Times, worked for Sunday Times and the Sun. So obviously we were aware earlier than the public, but not all family members had been notified, so we couldn't make it public while I was on air. But really, I think we were all really shocked. Came across him a lot. He was a friend of the station. Known him for years, and absolute. I mean, character. He's a character. He was properly a character. It's amazing how Marmite he has been in his life, but also in his death. People go, "Oh, he was a disgusting this, disgusting that, awful man, racist, blah, blah, all these things." But literally, in real life, absolute sweetheart. I mean, lots of effing and blinding. I personally don't have a problem with any of that. Absolute charm. And I think genuinely one of the best writers. Yeah. I mean, he is the person you would buy a newspaper for, to open straight to his column and then read it. His column was always the column that I would irritate my husband by reading out loud. Go, oh, this is so funny. And he'd be like, for the love of God, I'm trying to watch the football. And I'm reading out his column, you know. There
is no greater tribute to him than that. And I think that's what he will be remembered for first and foremost. He was Britain's greatest living political columnist, for my money, pound for pound. Always insightful, sparky, writerly as well. There's a lot of pretty leaden prose sometimes in political commentary, a lot of wonkishness and sort of inability to be creative and insightful, as well as making a trenchant point. He was one of a kind in that sense. No opening sentence ever the same. Or hilarious as well, which is one of the things that got him in trouble, because you would have all these literal-minded, pearl-clutching critics.
Yes, he was the amount of people who replied to my tribute to him yesterday on X saying, you know, he was a paedophile. He wrote a column about how he couldn't be a teacher. Sorry, I won't even be able to say this without laughing out loud. You do just think he couldn't be a teacher because he would try and have sex with the kids, but he wouldn't go below. He wouldn't go below year 10, which is 14. I mean,
that kid is what we call a joke.
Yeah,
this is what people don't seem to understand.
A joke. I mean, again, it's a joke.
Yeah, and to your point about what he was like in real life as well.
And yes, you can joke about that.
Yeah.
You can joke about anything. That's the deal. Yeah.
And got himself in trouble with the Welsh, with all sorts of people over the years.
That was always fun.
That was always very funny. Sometimes even the police were contacted. It was, and proving his point about how humorless and joyless everyone had become, but also how.
So I'm still chuckling. I can't.
It's a great line. Look it up. But also, him in his personal life, he was always incredibly supportive of Spike, the organisation that I've worked for a very long time. Gave me a chance on his web show, Lidl's Got Issues, when no one knew me from Adam, and I was 23 years old and could barely string a sentence together. Always really helpful and forthcoming with advice and anything that he could do for you, whether it was appearing at an event or being on a podcast.
Yeah, I know he did loads of stuff with you guys, didn't he?
Have to do any of that. And this is someone... So this, I think,
paid.
also speaks incredibly well of the man. He will be remembered first and foremost as such a tremendous journalist, voice. Also, as someone who kind of his path into public life, shall we say, is one that feels like it's increasingly narrower for people. You know, working class from the northeast, someone who is broadly speaking of a Labour background, but at the same time very socially conservative, trenching in both sides of his
Well, he
views,
was SDP. You know, William Claston, you know, paying tribute to him. He was SDP.
It's a kind of character.
Kept trying to get me. I was SDP when I was a teenager, so I was a
kind
big
of
fan.
the OG SDP, as it were.
Yeah.
But this is a kind of character and a kind of figure that contemporary culture almost cannot reproduce. So it feels like not only have we lost a kind of singular talent, but also a type of writer, a type of person,
but
a
also,
type of voice that we don't have anymore.
He just upset all the right people, which was an absolute joy to behold. You know,
I think he once referred to himself as an equal opportunities C-word.
Yes.
Which I thought was a brilliant way to
absolutely.
sum up.
I'm going to have that on my gravestone. 10:29 is time. We're going to be talking actually with one of his former editors at The Spectator in a few moments as well. But we're going to get your calls up next. Do give us a call. I want to know particularly about this early prison release and the choice. And just do tell me, would you rather be raped or killed? I mean, that seems to be where Andy Burnham is going with his decision on who does and who doesn't get released from prison. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
So the full list of candidates for the Clacton by-election: Joseph 77, the Independent; Adam Akateep, the Forward Party; Count Binface, the Count Binface Party; Nick the Incredible Flying Brick, the Official Monster Raving Loony Party; Tony Kane's an independent; Woke Trump Kazi is an independent; William Stewart James Clouston is the Social Democratic Party candidate; Rhys Cowan, an independent; Glenn Charles Cummings, an independent; Martin Davis, the Freedom Alliance Real People Real Alternative; Andy Earlam's an independent; Nigel Farage, the Reform UK Party; Atiye Fards, an independent; Lawrence Fox for the Reclaim Party; Tony Francis is an independent; Robin Green, an independent; Abby Hookway, an independent; Howling Lord Hope, the Official Monster Raving Loony Party; Stephen Richard Ingram is an independent, as is Amy Morris; Derek Norbert Morris is an independent; Michael Noel O'Keefe, an independent; Martin O'Brien, an independent; Nick Pellis, an independent; and Ketanar Kumar Pipiaya is the UK Voice Safer and Stronger UK Party; Daniel Pocock's an independent; James Ransley, the Consensus Party candidate; Jerry Smith is an independent; Kai Stevens for the British Democrats; John Stevens for Rejoin the EU; Baron von Thunderclap for the Official Monster Raving Loony Party; Pamela Walford is an independent; Marcus White, Everyone is God Party; and Mark Wilkinson for the Independents.
The UK on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
I'm sorry about that. You've got a whole list of names being read out by Jeremy Kyle of the Clacton by-election candidates. So I bet you really enjoyed that, folks, but there we are. Anyway, let's go to your calls at 10:33 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Paul is in Southampton. Paul, you want to talk about this prison early release scheme, don't you? What do you make of Burnham's decision? No rapists or child sex offenders, but killers can go free early.
I just think, once again, we've got a government that they're never going to get attacked by these people. and so it's never really going to affect them in their private lives.
Yeah. Yeah, as with all these things. I mean, again, it's like, I bet they don't have a, house of multiple occupancy full of, Afghan boat arrivals, at the end of Downing Street, do they? Or next to where most MPs live. They just, or most civil servants who make these decisions, they don't have to live with the consequences of their decisions.
No. I mean, it's like we're saying, if we got 10,000 foreign criminals, if we got rid of them all, we'd have 10,000 prison spaces.
I mean,
it's not rocket science.
It really isn't, and especially as a hell of a lot of them are Albanians. Maybe we should stop letting Albanians in if we've got such a high rate of criminality. I'm just going to throw that mad idea out there. And we've got a deal to return people to Albania. Why don't we just return them to Albanian prisons?
Well, I mean, the problem is the same with these illegal migrants coming across the channel. It's the will to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would ban Albanians. I would ban Romanians because I just don't think there's a section of Romanians that are just not right.
I have a Romanian in my own family, so I definitely wouldn't ban her. But I do think there's a perfectly strong case for bans on visas for people arriving from countries where we have seen a high rate of criminality. I find that to be a completely sensible decision to make, where we have higher expectations of, you have to jump through more hoops. Doesn't seem unreasonable to me at all.
Yeah, but again, it's the political will to do anything. And for the last 16, 20 years, there's been no political will to do anything that saves this country. I mean,
couldn't agree more.
If Reform don't get in next election, and that's because I'm a Reform voter, I think this country's doomed. I really do.
I mean, I think there are a lot of people who do share that view, that, last chance saloon and all that. Paul, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. Ray is in Colchester. Hello, Ray. What do you want to say?
Yes, good morning to you. Well, to be fair, Paul said a lot of things I want to say, but I do want to start with this. Which of those officials who going to make these decisions to release the people for manslaughter and those who've for domestic violence, which of those will be held responsible and stand in the dock when inevitably someone is either beaten to death or someone is attacked in their home, raped and killed? Which one? Well, the answer, as we know, is none of them. Listen, we've talked about this many times. We now have a justice system which seems to have completely forgotten what the word justice means. We have a two-tier system where certain people will be treated one way, others another way. And even when we put them into prison, as you mentioned earlier, with a sentence that we know is a lie, and that lie is being taken to its even further extremes. But the very fact that they could even contemplate releasing child molesters, rapists and all the rest of it in the first place just shows, one, the utter contempt they now hold the people of this country in.
The justification being, but we won't have anywhere else to put new prisoners. It's like, it depends what the new prisoners have done, though, doesn't it? I mean, have they raped a child? Maybe I'd rather have the child rapist behind bars.
Well, I just think that the whole problem now, and just part of the whole of the establishment is, and I genuinely used to believe this up until quite some time ago. I believed that I, as a law-abiding citizen, behind me stood the judiciary, stood the politicians, stood the whole system. Now, I believe the complete opposite. I think as a law-abiding citizens, you are the enemy of the system. The lawbreakers are treated with absolute kid gloves, whereas you, the slightest infraction, they come down upon you.
22 miles per hour on a public road, Ray. What were you thinking? No, I completely agree with you. I've always said, if a white middle-class woman, and I don't think that the police, the justice system is going to treat me fairly and be on my side, then if you've lost the trust of people like me, I'm supposed to be one of the the privileged. It's like, no, sorry, I'm with you on every single word, Ray. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that call. 10:38 is time. We'll take another quick break. Up next, going to be talking to Reform UK councillor Darren Grimes. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:41 is the time. Let's talk about all things political right now with Darren Grimes, who's a Reform UK councillor, Deputy Leader of Durham County Council. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Lovely to speak to you. Now, I must ask you about this early prison release scheme. Andy Burnham has said basically, I've done everything I can. We're not going to let rapists, we're not going to let child sex attackers or groomers out, but we are going to let killers. And it turns out, domestic violence perpetrators as well out early for their sentences because prisons are too overcrowded. Do you understand the logic of that?
No, I don't really, to be honest, Julia. I would accept if he were to say, we have a national emergency as far as prison spaces are concerned. Lizzie Harper, the partner of PC Harper, the late PC Harper, of course, she spent longer campaigning for justice than the men who actually killed her husband will ultimately spend behind bars. That's the really sickening thing about this, Julia. What a short amount of time they've been away for. And Burnham says he's pushed it to the very limits of what's possible. Well, we all know that that's risible nonsense because ultimately the limits of possible always seem to land on the victim's side of the table. It's their human rights. It's their rights to a fair trial. It's their rights to safety and comfort, but nobody actually seems to care about the victims. And that's the sense that I get up here and elsewhere, where people are so thoroughly frustrated that they find that actually they're turning against the whole system. Yeah. And that's really damaging for faith in policing, Julia, and law and order.
And as we've been saying earlier, these sentences, they are just lies. They're just simply lies. How can somebody who was sentenced to 13 years behind bars in 2020, this is Albert Bowers and Jesse Cole, guilty of the manslaughter of PC Harper, and he was dragged behind a car. The driver has been convicted of murder, so he's serving longer, but and won't be eligible. But they're going to be released after serving just 6.5 years in prison. But if you're sentenced to 13 years, how do you get out after 6.5? I think we could understand getting out after 12 years for good behaviour, some incentive, maybe, but halfway through?
Yeah, I know. They treat him like a piece of meat. Let's not forget it was the most barbaric thing that many of us have ever seen.
His body was unrecognisable. Then they thought a deer. They thought it was a skinned deer. They didn't realise it was a human being.
Yeah, it goes to show, does it not, the extent of the damage that they inflicted on this poor man who was out there doing his job. Yep. And it's a thankless task. It's a very hard job that they do. I've got utmost respect for police officers who go out there and try to do it. Yep. But fundamentally, Julia, we need to be building emergency prisons. Yeah. We need to actually have the will to be able to imprison people, incarcerate people for as long as their sentence actually is. And we're not doing that. So right now, people just think it's a total joke because it is. And it's the least funny one I think we've ever been told.
Yeah, it really is a sick joke. Can I ask you about Reform's policy announcement yesterday, big press conference, Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef announcing this policy of basically turning the boats, not to when the Channel boats when they arrive in the Channel, instead of taking them to Britain and these people being processed and basically pay for them for the rest of their lives and never deport them, just simply taking them back to France, whether France agrees or not. If necessary, British forces dropping them off on the beaches in France from whence they came. The French not too happy about this, funnily enough. They say that this will be a breach of their national sovereignty. What do you make of that response?
Well, look, Jordan Bardella, who is obviously a contender for the prime ministership under Marine Le Pen's presidency, were that to happen, he has said that actually he would support Britain in turning back the boat. So there is support on the other side of the political fence to the Macron establishment that is currently there in France right now. But Julia, I think it's really important to stress that we've just had breaking news this morning in which a mega dinghy, one of those absolutely huge ones carrying 160 migrants, has actually caught fire during an attempt to cross the Channel. Yeah. Does this this not show the severity and risk to life in a dangerous stretch of water where for 8 years the Royal Navy has basically been sat dormant and watched while strugglers run a ferry service straight through it towards bed, board and benefits at the other end here in Blighty? I find it preposterous, and I find it cruel that we are giving such a draw to people to come here and do that we need to shut it down in any way we possibly can. And the political will has just not been there by the two main political parties.
Well, this is it. We're told by the French, this would be international sovereignty. There's lots of people, especially on the Conservative side, Conservative supporters, and of course, Labour side, saying, this isn't possible to do. Yeah. I mean, it is possible to do. We are going to upset the French. I'm all in favour of doing it, but we are going to upset the French, which is crazy because actually they wouldn't have the problem with all the people camped out in Calais. No. Lots of these migrants wouldn't even travel to France because then the reason they want to leave France is they're not treated well in France. They don't get given, room and board. Exactly. So they wouldn't be in France in the first place if they weren't travelling to the UK. We'd be doing them a favour, but politically they would not be willing to accept this. But what if France did retaliate? I mean, they're building our nuclear reactors. They provide a lot of our electricity. What if they did retaliate?
Look, I think ultimately, if you look at the way in which that the Spanish managed to turn back the people that had entered their territory to Morocco, for example, right, the idea that they cared about diplomatic relations, I realise France is a totally different proposition to the Moroccan one. But ultimately, I think actually in their commercial interest, the French, They do a great deal of business with us, whether that be, obviously, throughout the Brexit years, wine was mentioned, but as you say, energy as well. Because of our stupid net zero energy policies, the French are able to rinse the British taxpayer like you wouldn't believe by supplying us energy through underground cables. So, yeah, I think in the commercial interest, reality will win out. And, Julia, this wouldn't be a problem, actually, if the French stopped their open border piety within Europe and started actually implementing their own border. And by the way, the communities in the north of France whose lives have been turned upside down throughout the border, that sea border, because of the fact that they can't sell their homes, antisocial behaviour is going through the roof, criminality is up, they're going out of their minds, and dare I say, that'll probably be why Marine Le Pen wins the presidency next time around.
Could be very, very interesting that to watch, won't it? And just finally, I must ask you about this, supposedly olive branch put out by the Restore leader Rupert Lowe. Response from Nigel Farage yesterday, another response from Rupert Lowe. It's a little bit handbags at dawn between the two men, but do you think there is any chance of some sort of rapprochement between the two parties and the two party leaders, crucially?
Look, I fundamentally fully support those who say we need to unite the right. There is no one that wants Labour out of power more than I do. But ultimately, I'd just prefer doing it without screenshots on X. I think they're sharing private messages. Does that really look like the actions of someone who is genuinely serious about offering out an olive branch? If it is an olive branch, I think it's poisoned. One party's on 26 points in polls, the other's on a rounding error. And I think fundamentally, I would say to your viewers who might say, Darren, you're being churlish here, we don't have time for this, Julia. Coalitions are where manifestos go to die. We've got a robust coalition. We've just set out Operation Fortress. Ultimately, I think we are the ones that are leading the charge, and we haven't got time to be able to...
Why is reform going down in the polls right now, then? Is that due to either the Burnham bounce or the not Keir Starmer bounce, which I think that mostly is, or is it down to, in part, also Nigel Farage's problems over these donations, £5 million from Christopher Harbour and others?
No, I don't think so. I think fundamentally people accept that Nigel would have needed that for his security so soon after the murder of the late and great Anne Widdecombe.
Hasn't spent it on security, and it was long before that.
Well, certainly the premise of the donation itself has always been defended on that ground, and I'm perfectly happy to accept that Nigel needs security like no other politician in the country. But I don't think it's about that. I do think actually there is a moment of momentum behind Burnham in any new Prime Minister. There always is. Don't forget, Julia, that the Daily Mail were running stories saying that Theresa May was the next Maggie Thatcher, the new Iron Lady.
You make a fair point. We'll leave it there, Darren Grimes. Thank you very much indeed. 10:50 is the time. Up next, tributes to Rod Liddle, who very, very sadly died at the age of just 66 yesterday. This is Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:53 is the time. Let's talk about the very, very, very sad loss announced yesterday of the journalist Rod Liddle, who died at the far too early age of 66 yesterday. He was, of course, the star columnist on both The Sun and the Sunday Times newspaper, and, of course, The Spectator. Many years ago, and I still find this utterly bizarre, if you ever do make the misfortune of tuning into BBC Radio 4 in the morning, he was the editor of the Today programme. He would not have that job today, put it that way, given their policies, but he is one of the greatest polemicists, greatest satirists, and I think funniest writers I've ever read in my life, and sadly lost his life yesterday. But let's talk to one of his former editors of The Spectator for a number of years, Matthew Dancona, who joins us now. A very, very good morning to you, Matthew.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. I wish we were.
Pleasure.
I wish we were talking.
My pleasure on this occasion.
Yeah, well, indeed. I wish we were talking under happier occasion. I mean, he was a presenter, of course, on Times Radio, also our sister station here. I'd say in life and in death, the reaction on X, a lot of people like me going, oh, no, this is terrible, terrible news. Absolutely love the guy, really, really funny. And then the extraordinary backlash from many on the left who absolutely loathe the man. He was a Marmite character in life and death.
He absolutely was. Although, I mean, one of the silly things about what you completely correctly described, Julia, is that I think, Rod represents the best of a kind of journalism where even if you didn't agree with everything he wrote, I didn't always agree with everything he wrote, but so what? I mean, what I loved about the man, and I think he was a genius. There were very few geniuses in journalism, but Rod was one of them. And as you mentioned in your introduction, it kind of came out of not quite nowhere, but he'd been actually a very successful editor of the BBC's Today programme. Ratings had soared. And then they got rid of him because of something he wrote, I think, in The Guardian.
Of course they did.
And he re-emerges as a columnist. And I first came across him at Sunday Telegraph, then at The Spectator. And it was already clear from what I'd read from his Spectator stuff that this was someone very special. So I upped his word length and we rebadged it as Little Britain, ho, ho, ho. But what was great was that it would just drop in every week. And it was so funny and so satirical and so clever. And, the number of people who can do that. Yeah. And, of course, it upset and outraged lots of people, but so what?
Yeah, but also it's not just the number of people who can do it. The number of people who can do it week in, week out, in column after column after column. I was saying with Tom Slater, who editor of Spiked Online, who's in the studio with me, who of course have worked with him as well, and did lots of support from him, that his column was the one I would turn to first in the paper, but also annoy the hell out of my husband by reading virtually the whole thing out loud.
Yeah, no, but I mean that was one of his gifts, was that he had this ability. I mean, you're right. A lot of people did read him out loud to their spouses, to their friends,
whilst chuckling.
While chuckling, he was the kind of person that you could read out to your mates at the pub, and there are very few journalists of whom that's true. And I always was struck that when we had events or reader events, especially reader events, Rod was one of the superstars. They all wanted to meet him. They felt that he spoke to them and for them, and of course, because he was an extremely charming and generous man, actually a very gentle man, which some people find very hard to believe, but he really was. He would always find time for them. He would always he was the kind of guy who would spend half an hour talking to a reader about this and that, and it was typical of him. A very, very special individual. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what lots of people have been saying about how kind he was. And often people, and it's very interesting, there are a lot of people that people see in the public domain who are really, really nice and lovely, lovely people behind the scenes. Absolute horrors. And actually, it's often the case that the people you think, oh, that must be a horror, they're actually some of the sweetest people. I mean, the effing and blinding a lot. I wanted to mention one bit there. So many people replied to a tribute I paid online yesterday saying, oh, he was a wife beater and he was a paedophile. Now, this comes from a caution he accepted for a a marital, well, a row he had with his his widow now, effectively his partner.
Exactly, yeah.
When she was pregnant, and he accepted a caution. Both of them said, and she's very clear that there wasn't any, it wasn't an assault. It was something he accepted a caution to get out of the police station. Look, a lot of couples have had heated rows that and sure. I do hate that people say that he was not a wife beater, but also he was with his partner for many. He'd left his wife for a young woman. They were together for 18 years. This wasn't a fling. But also, crucially, when he wrote a column about how he couldn't be a teacher because he would end up having sex with the children, perhaps as young as 14, it was what's called a joke.
It was so obviously a joke, and
clearly not literal.
No, I mean, well, first of all, about the caution, as you sort of mentioned, Julia, I'd have thought that the thing to say about Alicia today is, as
his partner,
we're thinking is with his widow. We're thinking of you, rather than trying to weaponize this thing that happened between them 21 years ago. Okay, so the leaping on that I thought was tasteless, but I'm getting used to it after Charlie Kirk and Anne Widdecombe. There's a kind of ritual which sort of implies and often states this person deserves to be dead. And to a certain extent, I've just got used to it, and it's just part of the kind of silliness you get from the left. On the sort of pedo stuff, look, I mean, one of the things that's got kind of absurd is the literalism people have now.
Yes. Well, no, the left has.
The left have, no, I agree. Yeah. There's a kind of literalism on that side of the tracks, where you have someone like Rod Liddle, who stands in a great and will be remembered in a great tradition of English satire. Yeah. Jonathan Swift, more recently Aubrey Moore, and many, many others. And obviously, satirists say things that aren't literally true.
But we all say things like, I could kill you. Doesn't mean I'm going to kill you. I'm so sorry. Time is against us. The music has started. We're heading to the top of the hour. Matthew Dankona, former editor of The Spectator, thank you so much for joining us. And I know people don't want to talk about some of those aspects at the end, but I've had so many people from the left responding to me on that. I did want to tackle that. I'm sorry. He was a lovely bloke, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I'm really, really sad he's gone. And I can't believe being taken at the age of 66, far, far too young. Look, there's so much more to talk about. I want to hear your thoughts, particularly on the early release of Killers. This is Talk.
The Home Secretary has brought forward a very rigorous plan in relation to this. And let's remember, of course, the numbers can fluctuate, but overall, boat crossings are down quite significantly year on year, so that does suggest that the plan is working.
We've just witnessed drone footage of the French authorities handing out life jackets to illegal immigrants and then waving them goodbye as they head on their way towards the UK. So the French are actively helping and facilitating illegal immigration. In addition to that, the French forces did nothing to stop that huge migrant dinghy. In fact, the dinghy came out, then it went back to the beach to pick up even more illegal immigrants, and then departed for a second time. During all of that, the French did nothing, and they even handed out life jackets and waved goodbye as these illegal immigrants head towards the UK. I think that's terrible. I mean that anyone who did cross the channel and arrive in Dover could be immediately deported within around about a week.
Give that a second, he's just dragging a line by the look of it.
Is that a warning shot towards us? I don't know.
Well, I was trying to work it out.
Okay. The French officers could clearly see we were conducting an interview on the back of the fishing boat. They sailed extremely close to us and started firing gunshots, 11 live rounds. We could see the bullets hitting the water behind our boat. They weren't firing before their approach. They weren't firing afterwards. There was no notification of any kind of training exercise. So it did seem to me to be an effort to intimidate us.
The thing that I find, and I should say alarm clock Brits find so frustrating, Chris, and this is why I wanted you on this morning. Yesterday, finally, the unelected Messiah of Manchester stood up and said, to consummate fury from most of us, that Labour's plan to stop dinghy migrants is working. This, Chris, despite the fact that 1,000 illegal migrants have still come into this country in the last 9 days since he became Prime Minister.
Je suis un député dans le Parlement du Royaume-Uni. Why have you allowed the migrants into the water? Why haven't you stopped them?
Our order is to let them go like that.
Your order is to let them go?
We just have to say to them, don't do that, it's dangerous.
So your orders are not to intervene?
We have to protect them.
Well, there's also protecting the border as well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. You are with Talk. You already knew that bit, whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, watching on YouTube or all the other different formats. Fabulous to have your company with you all the way till 1. Delighted to say Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, is also with us till 1. If you do miss anything from the show, you missed anything from the first hour, go to my YouTube page, Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Coming up, we're going to discuss more on those early release plans of prisoners. Not rapists, not child abusers, but killers. Yep, absolutely OK to release killers just halfway through their sentence. Also going to be talking about that high-profile trial of puberty blockers is going ahead after the High Court rejected a legal challenge by campaigners, including James Esses, who we're going to be speaking to in this hour. Frankly, this is just absolutely astonishing. It's going ahead. My hopes were in this legal challenge, but we'll talk to him about what we can do next to try and stop, basically, the experimentation on vulnerable children, which is what it is. And because if Mengele was doing it in a Nazi concentration camp, we'd all say how disgusting it was. But apparently, if doctors do it for kids who they think are trans, there is no such thing as a trans kid, then it's OK and kind. It isn't. It's pretty much the same thing. So we're going to be talking about all of that. I want to hear from you in particular. Well, as you know, you can talk about anything you want, but in particular about this early release we're going to be seeing as of 2nd of September. Some 6,000 prisoners going to be released from our prisons. They're going to be men, mostly, and they are going to be people who have committed various different crimes, low level up to a very serious level. They will not include rapists or child sex offenders because Andy Burnham, the Prime Minister, has stepped in to ban their early release halfway through their sentences without probation, all of that, without any sort of parole board hearings and the like. However, he is going to allow killers, including the killers of PC Keith Harper, who was dragged to death behind a car by the thieves who he was trying to tackle in the course of his work. They will be allowed to walk free from prison. I'm just flabbergasted by this decision. I want to know what you think. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text us on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate and text costs £1 standard network rate message. We'd also love to hear your thoughts on. We were talking a lot yesterday about these reform announcements about how they were going to take the Channel migrants back to the French coastline. The French have basically said this will be a breach of our national sovereignty and international law. What would be your response to that? And what do you make of the latest he said, she said between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage over a Restore Reform Pact? Love to hear your thoughts on all of that. As always, same number to call, 0344 499 1000. Tom Slater, as I say, is here. Tom, I just want to come back on Rod Liddle, because we were talking a bit earlier and I didn't get a chance to bring you back in after we spoke to one of his many former editors, Matt D'Ancona. And it's interesting, Matt D'Ancona is very much somebody who's, he now works at, the New World, which used to be the New European, full-on Ramona, even though he was editor of the Spectator, the left-wing establishment that we rail against and Rod Liddle railed against, and yet felt such warmth and kindness towards Rod Liddle, I think, in life as well as in death. Mm-hmm. But talking about the left's reaction, some of the left's reaction to Rod Liddle, taking everything he's ever written totally literally, taking offence at everything, calling him, a wife beater and a paedophile, things like that, which he was not. Saying he was a disgusting man, he was a racist. Some of the things he's written, I've got to be honest with you, I would never have written, I wouldn't have thought. Do I think that man was a racist? No, I don't think he was. But, he was a brave writer. But what do you make of the left's reaction? Because we saw this with Anne Widdecombe's death. We have seen this with a number of cases with Charlie Kirk, as Matt D'Ancona mentioned. The Be Kind Left Brigade, who be kind to everybody, they're never kind when it comes to people with whom they disagree when they die or are hurt.
No, I think it's absolutely ghoulish, the fact that we now have come to expect that when a prominent figure on the right or deemed to be out of polite society opinion passes on, even in tragic, murderous circumstances, as we saw with Anne Widdecombe, then you get a kind of mix of chortling, derision, even implied or explicit, well, maybe they deserved it because they were a terrible person. And especially when you're talking about the kind of really sad losses that we've had recently, an Anne Widdecombe, a Rod Liddell, the reason that they are so mourned is precisely because of what tremendous individuals they were, agree or disagree.
Independent thinkers.
Independent thinkers, talented politicians and writers. And you can't help but feel that the intolerance that is sent their way, you also think, what have you ever achieved?
Yeah.
But also, you know, the literal mindedness and the pearl clutching that we've been talking about, people digging up jokes that Rod might have made in a column 15 years ago and choosing to take offence to
All
them.
of which, by the way, when angry lefties have been posting them online, by the way, Rod Liddell would love that I'm laughing at this moment, by the way. He would love it. But every time someone has posted something very, very po-faced, saying, and this outrageous thing that Rod Liddell written, to every single one, I have laughed out loud.
Yeah.
And I'm smiling now because I'm thinking of some of them.
Exactly.
And they properly make me laugh out loud.
Good writing is good writing forever. And that's a perfect example of it. And you think that it's also a reminder that the left have just become the new Merry Whitehouses. They're just running around, taking everything literally.
It must be so miserable being them.
They are miserable.
I have said to my husband and daughter, when I go, murdered, whatever, you know, don't read anything online. It won't be good.
Just switch off the internet for a few days. But this is the thing that it's become almost an in-joke and a bit of a cliche to say that the be kind left are not particularly kind. It's also that they kind of like to think of themselves as the countercultural, edgy, alternative ones. They're not. They're the modern-day equivalent of the blue rinse prude saying, ban this filth. That's exactly who you're talking about. And the fact that Rod Liddell needled those people showed that he picked his targets perfectly, because that is precisely who you should upset.
He would be... I don't think he was religious, wasn't he? I don't know if he was or not, but he was, yeah. He will be laughing. Probably from down there, to be fair. But he would be laughing right now at that reaction. Look, let's move on. Let's talk about, the decision to allow these prisoners to be let free from jail as of the 2nd of September, with the second massive tranche of people being released, 6,000 people. And I say decision because it is a decision. Everyone that's Justice Secretary... I'll name that cabinet minister in 5. It's Alex Norris. I know, I had to look that up this morning as well. These are not the most prepossessing folk in the world. But when Andy Burnham has written a piece to The Telegraph, and other people are saying, no, what can we do? You know, there's no other way of dealing with this overcrowding problem. This is what we have to do. And Keir Starmer made the same argument in September 2024 when this first started. This is not true. It is a decision. It's a policy decision that this is, in their view, the easy way out. Well, it is. It is the easy way out if you're not the victim of one of the criminals, and if you don't have to live next door to them. You're not, for instance, the victim of domestic abuse. You're not the mother or the wife or the child of someone who's been killed. But what I find utterly extraordinary in an attempt to deal with the prison overcrowding issue is that the criminals guilty of manslaughter will still be eligible for release halfway through their sentence. That will include Albert Bowers and Jesse Cole. These are 2 men jailed for 13 years in 2020. So 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. Oh, that doesn't look... Does that look like 13 years to you? I'm holding up 6 fingers. It doesn't look like 13 years to me. Their sentences were a lie. They were always going to get out after 2/3 of their sentence under the previous law. Now they can get out halfway through. The man who actually drove the car that killed PC Harper, he got done for murder. He's not eligible. But the decision that he won't release... Burnham says they were not allowed to release rapists or sex offenders or child sex offenders. Those men will stay behind bars, but will allow manslaughter prisons to come out. This is what I don't understand. There are 10% of people behind bars right now have killed someone. 6,500 roughly have gone for murder. They're not eligible. But just over 1,000 are in for manslaughter. That is not a huge percentage of the 85,000 give or take male prisoners on our estate. I mean, you've got 10,000 foreign prisoners, for a start. You've got a few thousand women prisoners, the vast majority of whom have not committed any violent crime at all. There are so many different solutions. To say that, you know, we've got no choice. I mean, Andy Burnham literally is like, no, oh, you know, you know, he's pushed to the very limits of what is possible, but could not accept more criminals without the prison system collapsing within months. That is simply not true.
Politics is all about choices and trade-offs. There is always an alternative option. Whenever someone says, I've got no option but to do this, there is no alternative to this
Even
path.
with a gun to your head, you've always got choices.
Exactly.
They may not be good choices. But...
That usually means one of two things, that I want to do this anyway, and I'm just presenting it as an inevitability, or I don't have the wherewithal to think of an alternative option. You can easily get trapped, many politicians have, by the sort of limits of civil service Whitehall thinking you couldn't possibly do that because it's going to have all these ramifications.
The civil service is the biggest problem in this country.
And it's often just inaction is all that it can produce. So there's all sorts of things you could do. There's all sorts of temporary measures you could take. Yes, you can't go back and fix the fundamental lack of investment in the prison estate over the course of the past 15 years. He's right to point out that that had been taking place for a very long time, largely under Tory government. But what he can do is act now. What he can do is prioritise certain types of offenders for early release over others, as you've described, but also standing up temporary accommodation for them. This is not beyond the wit of man.
You can
have
build
the power
temporary
of the British
prisons.
state behind you. You have resources.
Well,
you have
we've got some soldiers left who could do it. I'm sure we can get a contractor who could knock these things up.
It's that difficult.
There are a load of people behind bars who are not. Okay, we've got a load of drug addicts. You know, we've got, you know, but they're not all violent offenders.
You would think that a Labour Prime Minister as well would know better than most that the British state can act, it can do things if you want it to. Resources can be found. It's just what your priorities are, and yet its priorities seem to be totally mixed up.
You could build Nightingale prisons, you could free up a load of women prisoners and take over one of the women prisons and move prisoners in there and removing foreign nationals. I'm sorry, that's what you can do. But largely, we can get on and build things. We have got to start building stuff in this country much quicker. I'm all in favour of, you know, Keir Starmer's moves to try and, you know, change the planning laws. Again, these things are so slow. Other countries do not take this long to build a nuclear power station or a runway. Gatwick have said, they're going to build, you know, they're going to open their second runway. It's like, I mean, guys, you know, it's like how long, you know, third runway at Heathrow, what's that? I mean, 50 years they've been talking about that. We don't build anything. And I'm sorry, no, do I want to have a prison built near me? No, I don't. But I'm afraid we're going to have to build a prison somewhere. And we should, yes, by all means, let's compensate the people who live nearby. But maybe there might be some jobs there. Might be quite useful for quite a lot of areas. But we need to build stuff in places. And I just find it utterly extraordinary that we failed to do any of this stuff. And I mean, I do think, again, this is a decision that has been made. Oh, the grooming gangs and the rapes, we've got all these victims, it's going to look really bad. Don't let the rapists out because these women are on the TV talking about their groomers being out early. By the way, these groomers are not serving enough time anyway.
Yeah, when you look at those sentences, even if they serve the full term, you think that is nowhere near
But again, I've said this a million. You should serve the full term of what you've actually been sentenced, not the lie of half or two-thirds or a third or whatever it is. But also, crucially, if you've committed more than one crime, it needs to run consecutively, not concurrently. I want a little bit more of these American things where someone's sentenced to 250 years. Not, you know, you raped 14-year-old girls 3 times a day for 10 years. There you go, you get sentenced for 1. I'm sorry, on what planet? I think that raping a girl repeatedly is worse than raping her just once. I think the first crime deserves a very long sentence. Every time you do it, I think you should serve the same again. No. I'm not sure that the 20th time she was raped was any less worse for her.
I think you would struggle to find anyone in the country who wouldn't want that individual to die behind bars.
Well, exactly. But there's a load of lefties. No, we are... The Lanyard Club, we are full. I know these people. I live amongst them.
But as you well know, they're a tiny layer, though.
They are a tiny layer of people, but they're very influential. They run all the quangos, they run all the charities.
What do they think is going to happen? You know, like 7 years into his sentence, he's going to become a reformed character, or he's no longer going to be a threat to the public?
They think that prison is about rehabilitation. I'm just saying...
You can't rehabilitate scum. That's as far as I think it comes down to.
They raped, a member of my family. I'm just saying, good luck serving prison sentence. Good luck getting there. I'll give you a 2-minute head start, mate, just because I'm sporting. But good luck. I'm sorry. I'm an old-fashioned soul on this front. It just appalls me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. And what do we make of Andy Burnham? We talked about it earlier, jetting off on foreign holiday just 2 weeks after becoming PM. Again, if he was going to Cornwall like David Cameron did. It's one of the weird things that posh people do.
Yeah.
Posh people love going on sort of more abstemious holidays. It's their thing.
It's quite expensive to have a
Oh my God!
Holiday in Britain these days.
Genuinely, you could genuinely have a much cheaper holiday.
It's a status symbol to be like, I'm going to spend a week in Cornwall.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than...
have you seen the prices? But always going, he's jetting abroad. But I've got no issue. He wants to spend time with his wife and family. He's got young kids. And I feel, as you know, I feel very strongly about the holiday. But I do think that if I just started, I don't think there's any job I've done where I've started a new job and then gone, oh, by the way, I'm going to go on a holiday. Like, maybe even if you just delayed it to the end of the month, or I don't know. It just seems to me to be a poor judgment. Or go away, you do the long weekend version of it rather than... But you've campaigned for ages to get this job, to run the country. We've got...
Yeah.
There's quite a big in tray, Mr. Burnham. Maybe you might want to actually spend a little time working on that.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, having a go at Prime Minister for going on holiday is a bit of a lame attack line, but it's one that he's opened himself up to by doing it so early. You know that...
No, I don't have a problem with PMs going on holiday. And there's like, they shouldn't be away this week. When can they go away? They've got kids at school, they've got the same issue.
And one could reasonably argue
2 weeks into the job. No, I'm sorry, you're taking the mick.
It looks bad, and it also... He could so easily have pushed it back. Also, he knew that he was going to be coming into power around this time. This idea that I'm just trying to be the MP for Makerfield, and this isn't about the leadership. I wouldn't dare plot against Keir Starmer. And yet we learned that he was meeting with civil servants. We learned
and planning his number 10 North.
Louise Hagan already had a plan for him, months and months and months, if not years in advance. You could have planned your holidays.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I've got no time for it. Now, I probably want to be away whenever we got Reform are in the news. Very much in the news yesterday. Nigel Farage's use of that big announcement. What did you make of their announcement about basically, was it Operation Fortress? Yeah. We are going to just take a load of these channel migrants. You're arrive on the boats, and we've had 157 migrants, one of those super... I mean, we talk about small boats. They ain't small boats. They're the size of double-decker buses now, lengthwise, mega dinghy, carrying 157 migrants. Caught fire during an attempt to cross the channel, because they've got engines, obviously, and they had to be rescued. Of course, they've all been taken on a lovely Royal Navy vessel or an Iron Line vessel back to Britain, and we're going to be paying for them. But the argument is, no, we will take the vessels and we will take the people off them and we will take them to France. If the French want to cooperate, we'll drop them at port. If not, we'll just drop them at the beaches. But we're looking at, British servicemen and women being involved, in the French waters and on the French beaches. French have said that would be a breach of our national sovereignty and international law.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where clearly the symbolism of it is front and centre. So the idea of deploying the Navy, the idea of just essentially erecting a kind of like physical barrier, aside from all the issues around pull factors and making sure that if someone enters the country illegally, they can never claim asylum, the legal changes, what have you. They're also being a kind of physical deterrent and kind of measure of last resort, if you like. The knotty issue, of course, is that whilst we are trying to defend our own borders and our own sovereignty, France also has its own borders, its own waters and its own sovereignty. And even though you've had...
But they choose to have an open border. Their entire land border is open, and that's their choice.
That is their choice, and they don't have a leg to stand on, particularly because they've been pocketing hundreds of millions and hundreds of millions and hundreds of millions from us, supposedly to stop boats leaving, and yet they are routinely leaving. They
are stopping more, and the boats are down by about 40% so far this year, but that doesn't... It depends. Have they all gone to Spain where they can go and get an amnesty? We don't know what. We don't know the reason for that. I doubt very much it's got anything to do with any policy.
And any journalists who've been out to cover the arrivals from France, shall we say, from the French side, it's a very similar story. They happen across a smuggling gang, they happen across migrants who are waiting to make the crossing. Often you've got the gendarmes observing the whole procedure rather than intervening. Chris Philp...
I have to go to lunch. It is 11:20. I might get my 3-hour lunch in.
Exactly.
I'm not joking. They do have a 3-hour lunch.
No, exactly, and that's their God-given right, this Frenchman.
I rather admire them.
Exactly. So, nevertheless, whilst we're on the third glass of wine, the boat leaves and nothing was done about it. But they don't have a leg to stand on. But I think one thing that is quite tricky, because we've already discussed, or you were with Darren Grimes, the announcement from National Rally, the right-wing populist party, that they would play ball with a reform government in terms of this kind of policy. You don't want a policy that is entirely contingent on what the government of France happens to be and its complexion at any one time. Absolutely. You need something that is firmed up. But I imagine this is part and parcel of and it is, if you look at their previous policy documents, of other measures which would hopefully combine to just remove the incentive for anyone to make that crossing in the first place.
I mean, it's very, very simple. I mean, as they said, in Australia, when they just took the boats back to Indonesia and people were processed off the Australian mainland, you're never coming to Australia. You're never going to set foot in it.
And it took ended within weeks. I mean,
and so did the deaths.
It does work.
So did the deaths, because people weren't taking the risky... People, they always think... There's always this treatment of people making these decisions. Like, these poor, desperate people. You're not desperate, you're in France. It's a load of nonsense. But the idea that these people don't make rational decisions. They do make rational decisions. Where am I going to get free house? And free benefits. Oh, and be able to, work as a delivery rider, not pay any tax. I mean, I think I'll go to Britain. I mean, it's not complicated, people. What do you make? Chris Parry, we had him on the show yesterday. He's a former, obviously, retired naval commander. And he said, look, the issue is, what you shouldn't do is have them on the Royal Navy. You basically hire a load of boats, big loads of, ferries and the like. There are plenty, still, you can go and buy them second, 15th hand. And you put the flag of another country, not Britain, and you process them, you take them onto that ship, and you process them on that ship. They have not technically, because it's not a British vessel, because it's not under the British flag, they've not entered British territory. You've got no duty of care to then take them in, and then you can return them or take them to that other, other country. You can go back to France, you can go wherever you want. You haven't got any right to come to Britain. We're going to pick you all up in the Channel. I mean, he said you could just put it out to a contractor. He said he'd happily do it. I mean, we were all volunteering to go work on that boat. I mean, none of this, again, same as the prison issue. None of this is beyond the wit of man. Yeah. It's about political will.
That's absolutely right. There are all manner of ways that you could do it, even under the existing framework. Australia did not become an international pariah state because it got on top of the boats when it did 10 years ago. So this is this idea...
And Tony Abbott wouldn't have cared if he did.
Of course he wouldn't, and that is also an important ingredient. But there are all kinds of things that one could do. I think fundamentally, probably the key sort of legislative change we need is that if you enter the country legally, I don't care what your backstory is, I don't care how many scars you want to show, you cannot ever stay here. Yeah. I think it's like a fundamental change that will remove a lot of the pull factors. But, all of these things are solvable. The issue is that we've had governments who either didn't really care about this issue, didn't think it was a big issue.
Don't think it's a problem.
Secretly would think that the answer would be to just charter a flight and pick them up from France and bring them over here, but probably wouldn't like to say that.
Well, Andy Burnham said, we just need more safe and legal routes. Sorry, these young men will not be able to get here on the safe and legal routes. They won't be prioritised.
No, exactly. So, or you had Tory governments who were just running scared of bad headlines and didn't want to
and people judging them at dinner parties.
Exactly.
I've said this so many times, people completely underestimate
which is a very important
how
consideration,
much
isn't
an
it,
awful lot of politicians, they care far more. It goes back to Rod Liddle, They care far more about people thinking they're a bad person.
Yeah, and that crop of the Tory party kind of before Brexit shuffled the deck a little bit, they were obsessed with not being seen to be the nasty party.
Yeah.
To the point where they would just willfully blind themselves to the disastrous consequences of many of their own policies. So that was what was stopping us from acting. And also, I think that the way in which the mood music is changing everywhere. You've got core European countries who are having to somewhat begrudgingly deal with this issue. Discussion about processing in Albania or in other places.
But those are the countries that apparently we should be more like and not have voted for Brexit.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was our terrible, horrible, bigoted people here, we're ignorant as well, and we believe the bus, that we voted. I mean, if only we could be more like the Europeans. Well, they're all voting for the ADF and the National Rally and... AFD, sorry, a National Rally and Giorgia Meloni's party. I mean, that's what they're doing.
No, exactly. And even at the EU level, they're having to recognise, somewhat begrudgingly, that the way in which they failed to police their own borders has been disastrous.
And what's happened in Ceuta has had a massive impact.
Yes, the kind of southern European countries have had to bear the brunt, but it's across Europe because of Schengen, because of the fact that as soon as you're in, it's very easy to traverse those borders. So, this is going to become... It's a challenge, certainly, for all kinds of knotty legal and human rights reasons, quote-unquote, but this is something which has become a priority for countries across Europe to get on top of, left or right now.
But this is one of those very interesting things, and this way it comes down to when we talk about reform and talk about a pact with Restore, and also with the Tories and some all the Unite the Right and an awful lot of people saying that's what they want on all sides. But again, it comes down to that trust issue, which is that people who said they would do it and didn't do it in government, but also is this something that people have been talking about for a long time and really care about and are willing to be called every name under the sun and stand their guard, and stand their place. And that's one of the things where Nigel Farage has. He has. I mean, you think of the stuff he's been called. I mean, it's interesting watching Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary for the Tories, out and about, tackling the, on the boats. But this is stuff that Nigel Farage was doing years ago. Years ago. And he was kind of stirring up, racism. I mean, even that poster of all the men marching through Eastern Europe, the breaking point poster, which everyone said was racist. It's a picture of the people who are actually walking through Europe. Why is that racist?
Yeah.
Why? Well, if they'd all been, I mean, by the way, they weren't black. But even if they'd just been completely white as I am, or even whiter, as white as Tom is, they would still have come up with some reason why it was racist, or But
isn't that telling though? Because I think if Nigel Farage stood in front of a poster like that today, you wouldn't get the howls of outrage on quite the same scale, or it wouldn't have been seen.
Because the public would just go.
I just think the Overton window, to use that terribly tired cliche, has really shifted. And I think Nigel Farage reform has been a big part of that. Brexit's been a big part of that. The way in which our politics has changed. I don't think there's any. You can't put this back in the bottle now. The public have had enough. They've noticed it.
They've seen it. They've noticed it. And they want it to change.
They won't put up with the gaslighting anymore. They won't put up with the complicated arguments as to why it's actually not a problem if you look at it X, Y, Z, and they're all doctors and physicists. It's going to be absolutely fine. We all know that's nonsense now. And I think what's amazing is that even a Labour government is forced to at least pretend to be taking this issue seriously.
And Burnham, bearing in mind, he didn't mention immigration once during the campaign, didn't mention it at all in his first speech, didn't mention it, I think, in his first week in office, forced to put on a shirt and a tie, head down to Dover and talk about it when we'd seen this footage from Suter, and which of course, the mainstream media desperately tried to sort of, keep quiet, but it was all over social media, and it is absolutely fascinating that even he's saying they have to do something about it. But again, it's always that talk about safer legal routes. I think everyone bangs on about, the safety of people in the Channel. People choose to do stupid things. It's like someone wants to bungee jump off, the shard of a building near us. I hope they survive. I don't want anyone to die. But I'm not entirely sure why I should be shedding tears for someone who does something stupid, like gets on a dinghy to go across the Channel.
The status quo is incentivising them to bungee jump off of the shard. Because if they survive it, they'll get free room, board, and a chance of being able to stay in the Shard forever. This is a terrible state of affairs. And yet, again, by presiding over this system, by pretending it's not a problem, by acting like the nice people, by saying, even though they probably want an even more liberal policy, they're willing to allow people to run the gauntlet of people smugglers, a dangerous trip across the Channel. Because if they get here, then we can look after them and feel like good people. It's a terrible situation for everyone involved.
That most people in Labour, in the Lib Dems, the Greens, and a lot of people in the Tories basically think we should have open borders and we owe the world a living. If your country's a basket case, maybe you should stay in your country and try and make it not a basket case. Because the reason why Britain is a great place to live now is, well, we're working on it. We're working back to where it was, where it should be, and the West is because people fought for it and died for it and battled and we built this country. It didn't just happen. We weren't gifted it. Our forefathers and our foremothers fought for our country to be the way it is, and no one else has got a right to just go, oh, I want to have my share. We will help you in your own country. You don't have a right to come here. That's my stance. I want to hear your thoughts on all of this. I want to hear your thoughts on the prison release scheme. 0344 499 1000. And genuinely, my question I put earlier in the show, would you rather be raped or killed? Because apparently letting out killers early is fine, but not rapists. I think I've got a preference in this. Both are horrific, awful things to happen to anyone. But on balance, I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I would love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back. 11:32 is the time. Let's go straight to call. Paul is on the line. He's given us a buzz on 0344 499 1000. Paul's in Cardiff, wants to talk about the prison early release scheme. Paul, what do you make of it?
Morning, Julia.
Morning.
It absolutely beggars belief that they can even think of doing something like that.
I mean, does it surprise you? It doesn't surprise me anymore. They've done it a couple of years ago. 6,000 people
I'd
out.
like to know how many illegal immigrants are locked up in prison.
Not very many. That's the answer. What do you think the solution is? Rather than releasing killers, violent criminals, domestic abusers, illegal...
Well,
what's the solution?
They got to build new prisons.
It's not complicated, is it?
Sorry?
It's not complicated, is it?
No. And I'd like to know why we're paying France £660 million a year.
Yep.
Because they're not doing nothing.
Yeah. I mean, they say they are stopping more boats and the numbers are down, but realistically, mostly the numbers go down as it's due to weather or some other thing that happens somewhere else, like, I would guess, Spain giving an amnesty to hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants.
Yeah.
You don't sound very positive.
No, and that thing with the PC that got killed, he just looked like a lump of meat when they found him.
They didn't even realise he was human. Yeah, but 6.5 years seems like a reasonable term enough behind bars, doesn't it, for that? I mean, that's the extraordinary thing. That's so absurd that you would only serve 6.5 years for doing that.
I know.
It's just awful.
I'm the kind of person that goes back to the Victorian times when they chain them up to the walls.
Oh, you're okay. You're serious. Hang 'em and flog 'em. Well, there we are. I think a lot of people might agree with you. Paul, thank you very much. I'm going to read some of the messages on this. We'll get to another call as well. Sarah says, shouldn't be allowing anyone early release from prison. Elliot says, just put the murderers in with the rapists and child sex offenders. That should free up some space. That's true. Robert says, Restore Britain already has a clear position on this. Binding referendum on restoring the death penalty for the most heinous crimes. Deport foreign national offenders. Full national crackdown on rape gangs. No half measures. Serious offenders should face real consequences, not early release. Henry says, maybe build a few more prisons. I mean, they are trying to do that. I just think we could probably do it quicker. Ryan says approximately 2% of the total estate in England and Wales, that's 2,200 prison places, are currently out of action due to maintenance, refurbishment or repair. I mean, exactly, I'm pretty sure we could speed some of that up. Dean says all this is going to do is encourage vigilante justice. If I had been stabbed by somebody or my friend had been murdered and then saw the perpetrator walking around 2 years later, I would take justice into my own hands. I think a lot of people would. I really do. Let's go to Grace, who's in Ealing. And Grace, you want to talk about reform and restore and this supposed olive branch, which a Reform candidate said, Reform councillor said earlier, was basically a poisoned olive branch.
Yeah, it does seem that way. It seems to me peculiar that Rupert Lowe seemed to kind of insinuate that his party is almost equal to Reform and therefore they could unite. Actually, though he has gained quite a lot of voters quite quickly, that doesn't in any way mean that he's going to continue growing in the same way because only a small proportion of the population support his policies.
Or have even heard of him. I really do think people don't understand. Outside of the internet, he's, outside of X, he's pretty much no one's heard of him.
I wonder if the fact Elon Musk supports him has kind of gone to his head and he now thinks that he's got far more influence than he actually does. I think that reconciliation generally is a good thing, but I think that in terms of the two parties, Restore's ideas to some extent seem at odds with what we might consider to be British values. Seeing Rupert Lowe's video the other day, one of the things that really concerned me was that he spoke about the share of the population that's white becoming less than a majority. And then he went on immediately to talk about Christianity. Now, Christianity has shaped the values of this country, but it's also not connected to skin colour, and it's not something that you're born with. You and many other people have decided that you don't want to adhere to it, and that's completely your choice. And for Rupert Lowe to think
they're the same thing.
Yeah, or to think that somehow people... I mean, as many people will know, people of colour, particularly black people, who are more Christian in this country.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. And although I understand that, say, the change in the demographics of this country and skin colour perhaps is the most obvious representation of demographic change, it is, again, I think most people in Britain would share my view, and I think yours as well, from what I can gather, that I couldn't care less about people's colour of their skin. It's just totally irrelevant to me. It's something you're born with. It's totally irrelevant. What I care about is people's culture, people's integration, people's values. That's what matters. Can I ask you, Chris, just very, very briefly, because I've got to get to another guest. But latest YouGov poll, very interesting, because Reform UK lost their lead. They've led, I think, over 300 polls in the last few years over Labour. They have regained, just like their lead, gone back up 1 point at 23%, Labour at 22%, Tories at 19%, Greens at 13%, Lib Dems 12%, and the Restore Party at 4%. But Reform back in this one poll with a lead over Labour. Do you think that bodes well for the future?
It's really hard to say. And I mean, we say a week is a long time, right? And 3 years is a very long time. Yeah. So it's hard to gauge. It's difficult to know to what extent Andy Burnham will listen to the general public. But just while I'm on the phone, I want to say condolences to those who knew and loved Rod Little personally.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Grace, thank you for your call. Lovely call. 11:38 is the time. We'll take a quick break. Up next, going to talk to former prison governor Vanessa Frey. What does she make of the early release scheme? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back. 11:40 is the time. This is Talk. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. I'm going to get Tom Slater's thoughts on what my next guest has to say. She is a former prison governor, Vanessa Frey. She's also author of the brilliant book, The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. Welcome back to the show, Vanessa. Lovely to talk to you.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Well, we've got to ask you, let's ask someone who actually knows about their stuff, rather more, I imagine, than me, Tom, most of our audience, the Prime Minister, before he goes in his holes, the new Justice Secretary, Alex Norris, about this, the state of prisons and why we need to have this early prisoner release scheme. It's the second one, had one in September 2004. Frankly, it had been happening whoever was in power, if it was Tories or Labour. I'd like to think some other parties would not do it. But we basically haven't got enough prison spaces, and to free up spaces, we're told we have to release people, including killers, domestic abusers, but not rapists or child sex attackers. What do you make of Andy Burnham saying, you know, he's got no choice, he's got to do this?
He's the Prime Minister. Oh. He has the power to make things work. And if he could exempt...
Oh, gosh. I'm so sorry that line. I'm so sorry, Vanessa. The line keeps just dropping in and out really frustratingly because we so want to hear what you've got to say. And it's to make a lot more sense than me today. While we get her up on hopefully a better late, it was sounding absolutely fine before she actually went on air. The tech glitch is always a nightmare. Tom Slater, I mean, it's just...
having prefaced this discussion by saying we don't know what we're talking about,
yeah,
let's talk
we're
about
going to just talk about it while we wait for the expert. But it is interesting, when a prime minister, you campaign to be prime minister, and you say, I'm prime minister, but I haven't really got any choice, got to do this. That's not true.
No, certainly not, especially because Andy Burnham's argument that he's made on all kinds of different fronts, whether it's the nature of the economy or whether it's the inability to, provide decent jobs or whatever, is this argument around political will. The issue is that we've had successive governments who have been prisoners of ideology or inaction or ineptitude, pick your poison, and that therefore they haven't been able to act, even in cases where it's so clear-cut. Surely this is a clear-cut case. You cannot have a criminal justice system where people are let out, not on the basis of how grievous was their crime, how much impact has it had on society, how much should we try to keep the public safe from them, but we haven't got enough space. If that is determining how long someone who's convicted of manslaughter, serious offences, is inside, then you've clearly got a big problem, and you need action in the near term and the longer term.
But I've said this on air before. I remember when I was on, there were other radio stations do exist, and I was on another radio station many years ago, and spoke to David Cameron in the studio. Sorry, can we just turn Tom's mic off because we're just fiddling with it there? All the tech things. It's the worst bit about broadcasting, the tech, isn't it? And I said, you need to build more prisons. And this would have been like 2012, something like that. You need to build more prisons. And he said to me, but that costs money. And I went, put my taxes up. I can't think of anybody who wouldn't want their tax. If you're going to, they put our taxes up again and again. You've got to put my taxes up to fund illegal migrants living in houses of multiple occupancy or hotels. You're going to put my taxes up to pay for, lazy, thinking they're vaguely autistic or anxious 18-year-olds not working. You're going to put my taxes up for loads of stupid things. Then why on earth won't you put my taxes up to build more prisons when we need more prisons? Yeah. I mean, there are lots of policies where you should start from like defence. What is the threat? What do we need to counter that threat? Let's spend the money that we need to do to counter that, because it's not for discussion. We have to do that. Yeah. The same as with this. How many prison spaces do we need? Then we will have to have enough money to build them. I think we've got Vanessa Frake back, but she's on the phone rather than video. But we'd much rather hear from her than not. Vanessa Frake, so apologies for that. Great to have you on the phone, Vanessa. So look, you were just saying before we got rudely interrupted by the tech. And this is a decision the Prime Minister's making. He's the Prime Minister. He can make decisions about these things.
Yeah, he can absolutely make it happen. I just can't get my head around, Julia, the fact that we are releasing prisoners like the murderers of PC Harper, of PC Harper, sexual child molesters. We are releasing criminals who've been convicted of domestic violence, coercion, etc., etc. To make prison spaces, that to me seems as absolutely ludicrous. Look, if we release these people, 6,000 of them, half of them probably will be recalled. So we are going
when you say, wait a minute, so 6,000 will be released, half will be recalled, and that's basically when you breach the terms of your licence, because we're told, look, they'll be dealing with, the probation people, they'll be dealing with, they'll be monitored, they'll be tagged, all of this. And half of people in these scenarios get recalled.
Of course they do. We've got a huge, really, really high call rate in this country for breaches of licence, whether that's failing drug tests, failing alcohol tests, being where they shouldn't be, not turning up for probation interviews. The list is endless how they can breach their licence, and then they're recalled to prison. Yeah. And
do they go back and serve the rest of their term as they previously, or do they just get let out again a couple of months later?
Well, they have to, if they've been before a parole board, they'll have to go to the next parole board. If they're coming up to the end of the sentence, they'll have to serve their sentence. Yeah. So to me, it's just ludicrous. I think Andy Burnham agreed for what he's agreed for to appease some of the public. But what he has done is he's misjudged the public reaction. The fact that the killers of PC Harper, the fact that domestic abusers aren't on this list, and sexual abusers of serious sexual abuses. And I just think that, we could do so much more. And let's not forget, these people are being released halfway through their sentence. They are not ready to be released.
Yeah, they've not been rehabilitated. Many of them may not have even shown any remorse. And this is the thing. One thing I don't understand, because roughly 30% of prisoners have committed a violent or a sexual crime, OK? Only 1,000 behind bars, only 1,000, but, basically, almost 6,500 are behind bars for murder. They're not eligible for early release anyway. But 1,000 have committed manslaughter. This is not a huge percentage of the prison population. I'm sure it's perfectly possible to let out people who have committed lesser offences. Even, I would rather have a repeat shoplifter released than anyone who'd killed someone released early.
Well, you and I both, because at the end of the day, these people are coming back into our communities. Yeah. How does that make our communities safer? How does that give justice to victims and survivors of those people? Yeah. It doesn't, does it? And I think he's shown weakness here by not going for the full.
Yeah, no violent offenders. And just finally, I'm so sorry, time is so short because we couldn't get the tech working, but just finally, what about the idea of things like, releasing a load of female prisoners, largely in for non-violent offences, opening up a female prison for perhaps the biggest risk, the low-risk prisoners from the male estate? What about building sort of Nightingale prisons, with porter cabins with barbed wire around them? What about something like that, or is that all pie in the sky?
There are so many options, Victoria. Sorry, Julia. I mean, look, if you think about releasing prisoners who take the female estate, so we've got about 3,500 female prisoners. Out of that, 58% are in for violent crimes. The rest are in for drugs, etc., etc. But that's still 2,000 places straight there. Shut a female prison, open it up as a male prison. Have a Nightingale prison. Use an empty army barracks, RAF base. There are things that this government could do, but it just seems, let's do the easy option. Let's just release them all.
And it's easy until they commit another crime, and then until the first woman who's been the victim of domestic abuser is murdered, it's easy. But not for the victims. So good to speak to you, Vanessa Frake, former prison governor. Thank you so much indeed for that. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to be talking to the man who's been leading that attempt to legally challenge that puberty blocker trial that's going to go ahead. This week, today, they will be recruiting young children to give them experimental drugs that will change their bodies and their lives forever. Why is this being allowed? Well, James S. is trying to stop it. We'll talk to him up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk the Home of Common Sense. 11:52 is the time. Now, last week got some very bad news from the High Court. Basically, a High Court rejected a legal challenge by campaigners to stop the controversial, can't think of anything more controversial, clinical trial of drugs to delay puberty in children who were questioning their gender. The Pathways trial, run by researchers at King's College London, was going to start recruiting children, more than 220 of them, aged as young as 11 years old, as of this week. Basically, they want to look at the benefits and the risks of puberty blockers, even though there really are no benefits to giving experimental drugs to children to change their bodies, because they quite mistakenly think they may have been born in the wrong body. Well, the man who was a very big part of that legal challenge is James Esses, psychotherapist, founder of Just Therapy and friend of the show, and he joins us now. Good morning to you, James.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. I can feel you're downhearted. I've seen some other interviews with you since we got this news. Absolutely heartbreaking. Your legal challenge failed. Just tell us why you brought that legal challenge and what the court said.
Well, we brought it because we were desperate to stop what I'm going to call, and I continue to call it, state-sanctioned child abuse. We already know the significant harms that these puberty blockers cause. You know, they put children on a pathway towards infertility. It harms their brain development, their bone growth, untold social and emotional effects. That's why they were banned by a previous Home Secretary for what he said was, quote, unacceptable safety risks. But now they're going to use children as guinea pigs, a few hundred children to be used as guinea pigs, even though thousands went through this at the Tavistock. So we were desperate to try and stop this trial because the politicians won't do it of their own volition. And we sadly lost, and the judge was extremely deferential towards the quote-unquote experts who have been overseeing this trial. And he said it's not for him to stand in the way, essentially.
The terrible thing is that Hilary Cass, who produces amazingly brilliant reports, a leading paediatric expert, a couple of years ago, and basically got the Tavistock Clinic closed down from doing a lot of this work, thankfully, although a lot of it's still going on online and in private clinics and people are going abroad. But she said, that perhaps, she opened the pathway for perhaps there should be some, a trial to assess the impacts of these drugs. But the extraordinary thing is that these drugs, you say these drugs have been given for years to thousands of young people, to children. I think quite wrongly, and you think quite wrongly. I think most of my audience would think quite wrongly. And many, by the way, the people who worked at the Tavistock Clinic thought quite wrongly and left as a result. But they were given to them, and yet there was no follow-up. I mean, experimental drugs massively changing children's bodies and lifelong impact, and yet no one thought to do any follow-up. I'm not sure anyone involved in any of that should have any work to do this in future. But would it not be simpler to simply talk? Presumably there's records. Track down the people who've had these drugs and see what the impact has been and see whether or not people regret it.
Well, this is part of our case. There is something called the data linkage study, which is essentially trying to track down those thousands of children who went on puberty blockers and see where they're at now. And we said that should be a prerequisite before any clinical trial takes place. The judge disagreed with that. We also said that there should be animal-based testing before we choose to use our children as guinea pigs. Hilary Cass herself accepts, she makes a point of saying this, there is no evidence whatsoever currently of any benefit from puberty blockers. All we've got is belief.
Yes.
And belief is not a high enough threshold to experiment on children.
No, but also, again, the children who have mistakenly, because of social media or their parents or goodness knows what's going on, the mad media world we've got saying, well, you could be born in the wrong body. A lot of the literature given to children now telling them this complete lie. I mean, that should be illegal in its first place, to deliberately lie to children like that. But being told that they may be born in the wrong body and therefore thinking they are, and then being given a treatment to kind of resolve that feeling. But if a child believes that they are fat when actually they're very skinny and they're anorexic, we don't go, yes, let's help you starve yourself, shall we? And think that is a kind and loving treatment. And I can't see any moral difference between those two things.
There is no moral difference, and I see these young patients week in, week out as part of my therapy practice. The problem is when puberty blockers, when cross-sex hormones are on the table, they're not even willing to engage properly with explorative therapy to try and accept themselves as they are. You know, that's the danger that these
and
drugs
the vast majority of these young people, we know, the Hillary Cass looked into this, the huge number of them are autistic. They have other learning difficulties, children who've been abused. Lots of a huge percentage of the children are children who have lots of issues with, you know, depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders alike. And again, huge part of this cohort are children who are simply gay. They're in families where they don't accept them being gay, or the kids think that maybe this would be an issue, and they're simply young lesbians, young gay boys, and they will grow up to live happy lives, and perfectly normal, natural, happy lives as gay people, and they're being told there's something wrong with them and actually they're in the wrong body and they should change it forever.
Yes, well, I'd say every single child client that I've got for this issue either has previous trauma, an autism diagnosis, internalised homophobia. And this trial is seeking to induce children to take part because they'll be given up to £500 worth of shopping vouchers for the privilege. I mean, how perverse can you get?
That seems to me to be extraordinary, ethically very, very questionable. But also, experimental drug being given to a child if they are dying of leukemia, and we think that this drug may save their lives. You can understand an experimental drug being given, but a drug being given to an otherwise perfectly physically healthy child to massively change their body and change their lives, because the pathway inevitably doesn't have to, but it does inevitably lead to children moving on to the sex change hormones like that. How can that be ethical at all? I likened earlier that this is to Joseph Mengele and the concentration camps experimenting on people, teaching people. These people doing this. They're no different to him. They're experimenting on child's bodies.
And the judge actually used that exact same hypothetical you just gave there. Imagine a dying child. If we block this trial, would we deprive future dying children of clinical trials? I mean, obviously not. And the point here is that, and I say this to the child patients that I've got with who believe they're in the wrong body, I look in their eyes and I say to them, there's actually nothing wrong with you. You want me to believe there's something wrong with you. I can see that, but there is actually nothing wrong with you. You're fine just the way you are.
That under the laws that government wants to bring in would be a crime, by the way, James. Whether you're a therapist or a mother.
Well, indeed. Well, I'm already packing my bags, ready for my stay at His Majesty's pleasure. But yeah, I mean, we're living in truly terrifying times.
If there's something worth going to prison for, trying to save a child from being mutilated and damaged for the rest of their life, I think that was a pretty good cause. I'll be with you, James. James, thank you for making space in the prisons right now for us. James Ayres is a psychotherapist, founder of Just Therapy. Let's hope there will be some more chances to stop this from going ahead before more children are damaged. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Secretary has brought forward a very rigorous plan in relation to this, and let's remember, of course, the numbers can fluctuate, but overall boat crossings are down quite significantly year on year, so that does suggest that the plan is working.
We've just witnessed drone footage of the French authorities handing out life jackets to illegal immigrants and then waving them goodbye as they head on their way towards the UK. So the French are actively helping and facilitating illegal immigration. In addition to that, the French forces did nothing to stop that huge migrant dinghy. In fact, the dinghy came out, then it went back to the beach to pick up even more illegal immigrants and then departed for a second time. During all of that, the French did nothing, and they even handed out life jackets and waved goodbye as these illegal immigrants head towards the UK. I think that's terrible. I mean that anyone who did cross the channel and arrive in Dover could be immediately deported within around about a week.
Wait a second, he's just dragging a line by the look of it.
Is that a warning shot towards us? I don't know.
Well, I was trying to work
Okay. The French officers could clearly see we were conducting an interview on the back of the fishing boat. They sailed extremely close to us and started firing gunshots, 11 live rounds. We could see the bullets hitting the water behind our boat. They weren't firing before their approach. They weren't firing afterwards. There was no notification of any kind of training exercise. So it did seem to me to be an effort to intimidate us.
The thing that I find, and I should say alarm clock Brits find so frustrating, Chris, and this is why I wanted you on this morning. Yesterday, finally, the unelected Messiah of Manchester stood up and said, to consummate fury from most of us, that Labour's plan to stop dinghy migrants is working. This, Chris, despite the fact that 1,000 illegal migrants have still come into this country in the last 9 days since he became Prime Minister.
Je suis un député dans le Parlement du Royaume-Uni. Why have you allowed the migrants into the water? Why haven't you...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 2 minutes past midday is the time. Thank you very much for joining us, whether you're on DAB Plus Radio or on YouTube or any other way of listening or watching. Great to have you here. I'm with you until 1 o'clock. If you missed anything from the show already, do go to my YouTube page, Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Hit subscribe. Never have to miss a thing. We're going to be talking more about that early release scheme. We're going to be talking about France. Not very happy with Reform's plans to return migrant boats using the Navy to the French beaches, violating their sovereignty and breaching international law, they say. I give a Gallic shrug to that. We're also going to be talking about Reform Restore. Should there be a pact? And also the new Education Secretary, Lucy Powell, saying that forcing schools to prioritise academic learning has led to the million-strong NEET army, all these young people who are not in education, employment or training. Yeah, let's dumb down our schools, shall we? We'll talk to a former Ofsted Chief Inspector about whether that's a good idea. Going to be talking to Baroness Kate Hoey in just a couple of moments. Delighted to say Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, is still with me. We went to the top of the hour with our conversation with James Esses, who has been doing magnificent work, such good work, and trying to stop this puberty blocker trial and trying to sort of stand up for all the kids who quite wrongly are being told they're born in the wrong body. No such thing as a trans kid. And I wanted to get your input because I know that some of you at Spiked have written lots about and done lots of podcasts about as well. He called this new state-sanctioned child abuse. Why on earth is there any need for any puberty blocker trial in the first place?
Of course there shouldn't be. I mean, surely the first diktat of medicine is do no harm. Yeah. And that's particularly pronounced when you're talking about children. I think you could say that our long-running experiment in gender ideology in the health service is a form of experimenting on children. I remember that getting Julie Bindel in a lot of trouble many years ago when she pointed that out, but she was absolutely right then, she's absolutely right now. This is kind of the unfinished business, I suppose, of the Cass review, which made this sort of concession in this particular area.
She was trying to be a bit too nice because of all the hate she'd got, and that sort of annoyed me.
Exactly, and because she came to the conclusion, rightly, that there is no evidence that these puberty blockers work. I mean, there's a lot of evidence, actually, that they do a tremendous amount of harm. I mean, these are incredibly powerful drugs, and the chances that you're going to progress onto cross-sex hormones after that are so enormous.
And then mutilate your body.
It's essentially a pathway to mutilation of perfectly physically healthy kids who happen to have other mental or issues in their life that need to be addressed. As you've already discussed, tend to be autistic, tend to be struggling with their sexuality. Why not focus...
Or have been abused.
Or have been abused. So focus the
huge rate of abuse
focus
for
on
those kids.
Care and counselling and therapy, not
which is about to be made a criminal offence. So if you're a parent or a family member or even a therapist telling a child that you're not born in the wrong body, you don't need to go on this, that could, in theory, depending on how the law is drafted, commit a criminal offence.
I think we've got all the evidence we need. We know that they do harm. We know that there's no evidence that they work. Why would you then subject young people to...
As young as 11.
As young as 11.
Girls
even incentivising them, offering them
You can't give a whole paracetamol to an 11-year-old. It says only break them in half a paracetamol to an under 12-year-old. What the hell are you doing? Giving puberty blockers. But also, puberty is a vital part of you growing up. It's about brain development, it's the bones, it has long-term impact. And again, it makes these... I'm sorry, I'm going to use this term, I mean it, I don't mean... But it turns these kids into freaks because their bodies don't develop.
Neither one or the other. I mean, all of this, it becomes a horrific...
Here's another side to this. And again, it was a side I kept away from for a long time because I think you'd have to fight the battles in the mainstream and try and get people in sport and all these issues and protection. There is so much more evidence coming in that a lot of the people who've been pushing this agenda of trans are actually men sexual fetishist men. They want to be they basically want to be searched by a female police officer. They want to be in a women's bathroom, and they block them. They're posting pictures, are posting pictures of themselves, basically, getting it on, getting excited about wearing women's clothes in a women's bathroom when they're a man, and they know perfectly well they're a man. There's, there we've got rapists and child molesters who are using their trans identity in lots of ways to gain access to children. But there is also, I think, there are paedophiles who want children's bodies to remain as children's bodies and not grow into adults' bodies. I think there is something that we need to start addressing there, that a lot of the people who are pushing this agenda are really sick people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, they are really sick people, and we need to start talking more openly about this. Yeah. The rate at which people are being arrested and convicted of paedophile crimes who are pushing this agenda is way too high for it to be just an accident or a coincidence.
I think that's totally right, and more of
that.
So
let's say the quiet bit out loud.
More and more of that is coming out, and this is something that particularly those people who have formed the LGB Alliance and the kind of veterans of the gay rights movement proper, who have realised that this is a real threat, not just to gay youth, but also to the integrity of the gay rights movement. There was a long-running battle to keep paedophiles, for instance, out of that movement, because they were trying to creep in around the edges, and of course that would only feed...
And bigots were associating being gay with being a paedophile.
It fed that age-old prejudice, and they did a really good job of making sure that bright lines were drawn, those people were kicked out, that they weren't involved in the movement. Many of them have crept back in under the banner not of gay rights but of trans rights, and that's something we have to be very aware and alive to.
Really, really, really do. Thank you very much indeed for that. I want to hear from you. Give us a call. We've got lots of calls I want to get to about Andy Burnham's, whether he was right to block the early release of rapists and child sex offenders but allow killers to walk free from prison. That's what he's like. Oh, and domestic abusers. I think this is just focus group policy making. That's all it is. But this is about releasing 6,000 prisoners from 2nd of September. It's going to go ahead. But don't worry, it won't be rapists, but it will be killers. People, including the killers of PC Harper. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. You can text us on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. Joining us to talk about all the big stories today right now is Baroness Kate Hoey, independent peer and former Labour MP. Good afternoon to you, Kate.
Good afternoon, Julia.
I do want to ask you, because I know you've just been the voice of sanity on so many subjects. Can I ask you just about the puberty blockers trial, just very briefly, your thoughts on that?
Well, the whole thing is just nonsense, and it's common sense to say that interfering with children, which changes all sorts of things, and we have no idea the depth of the changes that could occur, is just nonsense. And it's just outrageous that we're even at a stage where it's having to go to court and all of that. It should never have been part of the cast review, and I was disappointed that was something that still she seems to be pushing.
Yeah, indeed. OK, as I said, always the voice of sense and reason. Yeah. What are your thoughts on Andy Burnham? He's basically saying he hasn't got a choice. He's pushed to the very limits of what is possible to actually stop the early release of dangerous criminals. He's written in the Telegraph today, the truth is I wanted to go even further. I know there will be concerns about who will still be released early for other offences. I've pushed the very limits of what is possible to do. I know I can look people in the eye and say to them there is nothing more I could have asked for without risking the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing within months. So rapists, child abusers will not be freed, but domestic abusers and killers will. Is that the right decision?
Well, it's certainly not the right decision to release some people who have killed police officers, because police officers are the kind of final arm of kind of law and order. And once we accept that somehow they can be released early, when I thought actually the sentence originally was far too short to start with, is wrong. But, I just don't understand how we, as a country that is, supposedly right in the forefront of all sorts of things, can't actually get enough prison spaces. It's
beyond a joke, isn't it? Like,
it is.
How do we do this? But even
all it's doing... what it's doing, of course, is making people feel that it doesn't really matter now whether they offend, or particularly for those who continue to offend, because in the end, they're not going to have to stay in prison very long.
Yeah. And you don't go to prison at all if you're sentenced to less than a year.
Yeah, exactly. And what is there to stop people, particularly younger people who are perhaps, thinking, oh, well, this is a good idea of how we can get some quick money. What's to stop them now? There's no feeling that they're going to be punished. And of course, even if they let out all this number, what's going to happen in 6 months' time? I mean, presumably, or a year's time, they'll be wanting to let out people who've done even more horrific things.
Yeah.
So, he had to stick to the sort of, rape and child abuse. But murder is murder. And if people start thinking that they can murder police officers and be released very, very quickly, then I do think
the two men who are being released have been convicted of manslaughter, the driver murder. He's not eligible. But again, I imagine if you are the widow, Lissy, Lissy Harper, or the mother, I imagine that makes not much difference to you, frankly, who was driving the car and who was in the car laughing as your loved one's body was dragged along the road at 40 miles per hour and flayed alive. I mean, the whole thing is just horrific. But again, there are 1,000 men convicted of manslaughter who are in our prison estate. How many of those are going to be on the streets? And we were just been speaking to Vanessa Frake, former prison governor, and she's saying, half of people who are let out on these early release schemes actually get recalled to prison because, of course, they haven't been prepared for release. They haven't been rehabilitated. We know that, people are sitting in their prison cells 23 hours a day. They're not, they're not being sort of, taught to. They're not having therapy. They're not doing lots of other things where, which I don't know might. I would view a lot of cases not work, but it's worth a try. But we are just putting people away for a few years, a sham of a sentence, people serve a fraction of it, and then they're coming out, and then we're going, oh, we've got all these crimes happening. It's like, it's not a mystery, is it?
No, and, I think all of us believe that, going into prison is the punishment. What happens in prison? Yeah. I mean, no one is wanting to do, go back to them old ages of whatever they did with them in prisons then.
Some of my audience would like it to be very medieval, I've got to be honest with you, Kate.
Yes. I mean, I certainly don't want them to be given all sorts of privileges and having, rooms that are better than what a lot of people who have to live outside in the real world have to put up with. But there should be an opportunity for people who want to change, who want to get a job when they come out, who want to, and I'm not sure that the prison officers have time to do that because they're overstretched. And the whole thing just sounds like it's been ignored for many, many years. People have talked about it. There's every prison minister talks about we're going to change our prisons, we're going to make things better, and nothing ever happens. And it's just one of the many things, I'm afraid, in the country now that are just being allowed to sort of run down, and a feeling that nobody really cares and nothing really matters.
But also the general feeling, and again, we've had it from our messages on this idea that, well, what can you do? Well, I mean, you can build more prisons. Well, we're doing that, but you can build Nightingale prisons. You could let women out of the estate. You can get rid of the foreign offenders. There are plenty of things that could be done. There doesn't seem to be any imagination, any lateral thinking, any, and we talked about this in relation to the boats, and we'll come on to that now as well. The idea that all these things are just, well, what can you do? It seems to be, it's like the shoplifters. What can you do? All of these problems are easily, obviously, simply soluble. You just need the will to do it. You've been in politics. Why don't people have the will to do it?
Well, I don't know what happens to people when they get into power. They tend to just simply go into this kind of big blob of just doing very, very little. And people, what that does, of course, when they say, well, there's nothing much more we can do, and we've tried everything, and we're going to do more, as Andy Burnham said, and then nothing really happens. Well, then people themselves start to think, what is it worth it? Is it worth us, trying to make things better ourselves? And so there's a whole attitude now that is just almost given up. And I think that's really, really depressing for democracy, for our whole way of life and our future. I don't have the instant answers, but there's an awful lot of common sense answers there to many of these questions. And for example, I've always said I don't understand why a foreign criminal, someone comes who is not entitled to be in the country, gets a prison sentence. Why aren't they immediately deported? Yes, I know that some people say, well, they'll go back and they'll not have to serve any time. I don't really care, as long as they're out of our country.
Oh, I don't know. I think if they've committed a serious crime, I want them behind bars. But then, literally, the day they get out, and they don't get out, they are on a plane, nothing to discuss. I mean, drop them in the ocean for all I care. If they don't want to go back to whichever basket case country they come from, then drop them in the ocean, but they ain't staying in Britain. No, I'm at that point.
Yes, but they don't even do that, Julie. I mean, they don't. When they finish their sentence, they very rarely get sent back to wherever they've come from.
They've got a kid here, Kate. So obviously they can't be separated from their kid. I mean, come on, have some feeling. Don't you think part of the issue is an awful lot of the part of your former party? You were a Labour MP. They don't really believe in punishing crime. They think everyone's a victim, and they don't really believe in things like borders because we're so lucky to live here, and everyone should have a right to live here, and we're people of nowhere, anywhere rather than somewhere. There is a real problem on the left which has taken over a lot of politics, a lot of the civil service, the charities, the NGOs, where they just don't share the views of the vast majority of the British people.
Well, and most of them, of course, the reality is don't share the problems that come with some of these issues because they're not actually in day-to-day touch. Yes, they'll talk about going around their constituency and talking to people, but they're not actually living it. They know that they can get out of it if they want to. They can move. They can. They are very, very privileged members of Parliament, and I think there is this feeling all the time that because we, particularly Labour, because we care about. Supposedly, we were built. Our party is about caring for the poor and the underprivileged and the deprived, that somehow that means you've got to be kind of liberal to everybody and everything, and you forget the basis of how a society should be run, which must be on law and order, punishment, and the crime being punished properly.
And that is about fairness to the people who don't commit the crime. We should say, let's talk about, we touched on it there in Borders, reform, their plan yesterday, Operation Fortress, basically, we're going to take, instead of when we pick these people up in the middle of the channel, and we've seen 157 migrants rescued after a boat, and so one of the super dinghies carrying that 157 migrants on one dinghy. That's terrifying. Caught fire in the middle of the channel. But the French authorities said this. But people are being rescued all the time. Royal Navy or the RNLI, they rescue people, they bring them to the UK. Instead, no, they're going to intercept the boats and take them back to France. Now, France can either accept them at a port, Calais or whatever, they can be taken off by the authorities, or they can be we'll just take them to the beaches and drop them off there. French have said that's a breach of our national sovereignty. We wouldn't agree to that. It's a breach of international law. What do you make of that policy? Do you think it'll ever actually be up and running?
Well, I thought the most interesting thing was that obviously it was previewed that they were going to make this policy announcement, and of course it did push the Prime Minister Andy Burnham into actually having to say something about the small boats and migrants.
Didn't he look uncomfortable doing it?
And he went right down to where I actually visited a few years ago. I think I mentioned to see what was happening there, and he looked uncomfortable. He didn't look like he really knew. I think he knew that he wasn't actually saying anything new or important that was going to make a difference. But at least the reform policy has got people talking again about it, because when you look at what happened in Spain with the Spanish territory off Morocco, and you saw that. Where was the European Court of Human Rights then for a European Union country? They immediately sent as many back as they could. They did all of that. No one in the European Union said, we've got to go to law and make sure that all these
people... They were calling for the Spanish to send the troops in.
Absolutely. So, the European Court of Human Rights, I know for a lot of people it's a sort of idea, what's that going to do? That really, we do need to get out of it. We need to get ourselves free of it. It doesn't mean we're going to not give people rights. We're not going to allow people to go to court.
We had human rights long before the European Court of Human Rights.
Exactly. And we gold plate the European Court of Human Rights. Other countries ignore it when it suits them, and it suited Spain to ignore it. They did it. No one said a word. In fact, everyone's saying, how they've dealt with it very, very well. We can't do anything like that, or we're treated as if we're some kind of pariahs and racist. I mean, it is just shocking. And I thought that what happened there should have been an example for the Home Secretary and for Andy Burnham to actually come out and say, look, we are going to get tougher. And yes, the reform policy needs to be examined. I'm not an expert on the Navy, but it seems to me that if the armed forces are there to defend our country, well, we jolly well need our country defended for thousands of people coming in undocumented, no idea who they are. without being stopped.
And some of whom we know for certain are terrorists, indeed. Now, I know you're an independent peer now, but what do you make of the supposed overture from Rupert Lowe, the leader of Restore, and his overture to reform, and these calls to unite the right? Normally, people are talking about the Tories and reform. This is about reform and restore. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think if you're serious about it, you don't, immediately go public and tell people what you've done. And I think Rupert Lowe, if he was serious about wanting to make a rapprochement with Nigel Farage and reform, he would have done it quietly. He could have picked up the phone. I mean, they all know each other's telephone numbers. And then Nigel responded in a way which was saying, I'll call. And then, of course, he comes and says you didn't call, or you said you would call and you didn't. And all of it, it's really, I think for members of both parties, it's kind of dispiriting to see all this out in the open if they want to get together. And I think there's a lot of people in Restore who really should be, I think, in reform. I don't think Rupert Lowe helps himself by sometimes being extremely nasty in his comments, which, defending Nigel, I don't think he does quite so much against Rupert, but let's see.
We shall see.
It's the only people who... Go on.
No,
I was just to say the only people who are benefiting from this are, is the Labour government.
Well, indeed, that's the interesting thing. It's very interesting. The latest YouGov poll, that's the first one, put reform back on top. Again, it's all within the margin of error. This, but up 1 point to 23%, above Labour, 22%. Bearing in mind they had a massive lead over Labour under Keir Starmer. Then we had well, again, everyone calls it the Burnham bounce. Actually, it was the thank God Keir Starmer's has gone bounce, if you ask me, which is actually the bounce went in the polls even before Keir Starmer went. Just great, we're not going to have to deal with this awful man for a little while. But I mean, certainly Burnham, of course there's going to be a bounce. He's much more personable, communicates well. But I've said there'll be a bounce, and there's no doubt at all in my mind that it will not last long, because the man he's an absolute empty vessel. He's a perfectly nice, charming guy, but he has no ideas, no plan. He's off on holiday apparently for just after 2 weeks after taking the job. But what do you make of those polls?
Well, I agree with you about polls. You can't always go for them, but they're usually on the broad spectrum reasonably well. I think both the Labour Party in particular and some of the media have really overplayed their nasty attacks on Nigel Farage and reform, and it's kind of seen almost as persecution. And I don't think people out there, the average voter, is actually too concerned about some of the issues that's being pushed, because they probably all think all politicians are making money so it's
Did you get your £5 million, Kate?
Oh no, I did not. But anyway, I do think that you're right about Andy. There is a bounce. There's always going to be a bounce. It won't last. If reform keep their head and don't do anything really stupid and don't react too much to all of this, I think we'll still see the polls showing that there's a very good chance of a reform government.
Very interesting. Always so good to talk to you, get your thoughts on lots of different stories. Baroness Kate Hoey, independent peer and former Labour MP. Come back to you, Tom Slater, on this poll. I mean, it was 300 plus polls where reform were in the lead, and quite substantially, and we did see this bounce. What do you make of the Burnham bounce, and what do you make of how long it'll last and what it's down to?
I think you put it perfectly earlier, which say that it's not a Burnham bounce, it's a not Starmer bounce. I think people were so relieved not to have our country being led by this stammering, adenoidal, weak figure.
I couldn't bear to listen to it.
Yeah, we've certainly had worse prime ministers, but there was something about him just being a sort of daily affront to the esteem of the office, which really started to rile people up. Andy Burnham, by contrast, seems like a human being. That's an upgrade, I suppose. But when it comes to the issues that are really roiling the country, I think the things that he wants to do, he's not going to be able to do because of the fiscal situation that we're in. And the things that the country wants him to do, he's not going to be able to do because he won't be able to get it through his own party. So those things are
doesn't want to do it.
Exactly. So I think that is...
he's really... I mean, with this notion of this soft left, I mean, they're not hard left like Jeremy Corbyn, but he's pretty darn close in terms of a lot of his views.
I think one of the things that distinguishes the soft left from the Corbynistas, apart from being a little less extreme, is also it's just
and not necessarily anti-Semitic.
Yeah, which they've got that going for them. But it's all vibes. It's all very vapid. I am a Labour person, and that means
so I'm going to do it nicer.
Doing the right things.
But also, I constantly, one of the things he keeps saying is, I'm going to do things differently. We're going to change the way we do things.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated with a lot of the media coverage. It's just here. I mean, it's actually laughable. I mean, they did this with Keir Starmer. Oh God, he was going to be so amazing. I mean, you think, well, how's that worked out for you? Very early on. I mean, again, I know people, who know him, in North London. They would say, oh no, he's really great. And they're like, what are you seeing?
Yeah.
What are you seeing that is clearly not there? Not that I'm not saying it's not there. I think the public has spoken, including his Labour MPs, who ousted him, by the way. Small point worth making. It wasn't us. It was the MPs. But the really weird thing is that they talk about Andy Burnham in the media now, whether it's BBC or Sky the Guardian, the Mirror, just melting in front of him. But they talk about how but he's done so much since he's been in office. He's announced he's going to be looking at social care reform.
Yep.
He's announced that they're going to do this. He wants to do, and you think he hasn't done any of these things.
Number 10 North.
Number 10 North.
That is single-handedly reset the North-South divide.
I mean, everything's changed. I mean, suddenly you can get across from our major cities easily in the morning to get to work because everything's functioning. I mean, it's just sort of, he hasn't actually done any. I mean, and they said he used to do this about Keir Starmer as well, that he's announced announcing something doesn't make it happen.
It doesn't.
You actually have to do it. And I know you can't get that stuff done in 2 weeks, but he didn't have a plan. He doesn't have a plan. John Healey, the new Chancellor, he has said quite categorically, he's written to departmental heads to say you're going to have to do things, including the Number 10 North thing, out of existing budgets. There is no new money because there isn't any money.
Yeah. The thing about the mainstream media and the great and good in this country is that they are incredibly easily impressed, provided that the Prime Minister or politician in question has a red rosette or is, broadly speaking, on the progressive side of politics.
And calls them mate.
Yeah. You've seen it with Andy Burnham. This is someone who is running almost entirely on personality, on the idea of being a nice bloke. There is a certain type of kind of liberal left person who genuinely thinks that all issues in politics can be solved if you have nice people.
And you can just go and talk to Macron and then you can sort the boats out.
Exactly.
How's that working?
Everything will be fine. Absolutely absurd. Even, the Zap Polanski thing has run aground now, but there was a time when he was being hailed as such a kind of fascinating, interesting, radical figure, and everyone's realised that he's barely got 2 brain cells to rub together, and the 2 that he has seems to lead him to
It's not just he's leading a racist party,
stuff.
He's thick as mincemeat.
Exactly, which is part of the reason he doesn't seem to detect how many dodgy characters seem to have ended up in his party under his own leadership. So this is part of the problem, is that scrutiny often gets completely frozen at a time like this. It happened with Keir Starmer. I remember when he first came in, they were treating him like the greatest thing since sliced bread. They were asking him kind of smash hit style interview questions, absolutely enjoying themselves. But it won't take long for the shine to come off him, even amongst people who've previously been his cheerleaders, because he does not have what it takes to lead the country.
He's not going to do any of the things that need to be done. He hasn't got the money, as you say, to do the things that he says he wants to do. And he's got the same backbench, the same international conflicts going on. Nothing has changed. It's just in a black T-shirt now.
Exactly.
And more bearable to listen to.
And that's good enough for some people, it seems like. But again...
If that's all you want for your country. But again, a lot of these people, as a lot of our callers and our guests say, they don't live the consequences of the failure.
Yeah. No, they don't. They're insulated from it, which is what allows them to support these people.
Exactly.
And this is not about having, like, a new face and a new... Being Prime Minister is like being a TV presenter.
The problem wasn't communication.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. 12:28, it's time. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that and anything and everything. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk the Home of Common Sense. 12:31 is the time. In a couple of moments, we're going to be talking to Restore Britain's campaign director, Charlie Downs. Stay tuned for that. First up, though, going to get more of your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Frank is in Bristol. Good afternoon to you, Frank.
Hello, Julia.
Hello. You wanted to talk about the migrant policy, didn't you? What do you want to say?
Yeah, they say, how do we get them out of there? Going back some time, we had a fleet of hovercraft cross-channel vehicles.
Yeah.
It was 25 minutes to cross the channel.
Yep.
Let's call it an hour to load and unload, our end and their end. 1 hour. Some of those hovercraft were capable of carrying 800 people at a time. There's 800 people gone in an hour.
The issue is, I mean, we all know how we can get people on a boat. I mean, frankly, I'll just push the dinghy back in. But it's whether you can land anywhere to get rid of them. France says
that's the beauty of a hovercraft. A hovercraft will go straight up the beach.
Oh, there is that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah. Straight up the beach. You branched on it just now. If they won't let us load, then chuck them off at the beach. There you go.
I mean, there is that, isn't there? I mean, I know a lot of that wouldn't be legal, maritime law. But we had Chris Parry, the former.
The legality of it, Julia.
Yeah.
The legality of it is it's illegal what they're doing by.
In the first place, yeah, but we're not allowed to.
In the first place,
we're not allowed to break the law.
We're not allowed to be illegal, but. What do you make of justice? Your soft is.
Yeah, Frank. Yesterday we had the former Rear Admiral and Naval Commander Chris Parry on, and he was saying the key thing is you need to have a vessel. You know, the vessels in the Channel need to be under a foreign flag, not under UK flag, and you take the people on board, and then you process them. They're not ever on British soil or British British vessel, so we don't have any responsibility for them. He says, put it out to contractors. Don't get the Royal Navy to do it. What do you think of that?
I think that's an excellent idea.
I know. We all volunteer to come and help. I don't think you need to even pay. Don't even need to pay wages. We'd all volunteer. Frank, thank you for that. Some text messages also coming in about Andy Burnham blocking the early release of rapists and child sex offenders, but not killers. They're going to be allowed to walk free from prison. No killer, says Lee, should ever be released. If you murder someone, you should get life in prison. A life should mean life. The murderers aren't being released under this scheme. They will be released, most of them eventually, Les. But these are people who committed manslaughter. So someone has died as a result of their actions, but it wasn't a deliberate attempt to kill them, I think is the definition, really. Tim says it shouldn't even be up for discussion. Why are our cowardly politicians scared to deport foreign criminals to free up spaces? And Ian says, a question that doesn't need to be answered. More prisons, please. We're going to need them. And Julie says, so if murderers get out earlier than rapists, then rapists might think it's better to murder their victims and get out earlier. I mean, that's a fair point. Edmund says, in capital letters, build more prisons. Simple. I mean, kind of nailed it there. Going to take a quick break. I said up next, we're going to talk to Campaigns Director at Restore Britain, Charlie Downs. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 12:37 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, as you know, and my next guest is the campaigns director and spokesman at Restore Britain, and he is Charlie Downs, and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Charlie.
Hello, Julia. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Can I ask you, this so-called olive branch offered in this video a couple of days ago by your leader, Rupert Lowe, to Nigel Farage, in a 12-minute public video posted online, was it actually a genuine bid to try and sort of form a rapprochement, or, as many people are saying, was it rather poisoned? And if he'd really wanted to basically try and do a deal, he'd have done this behind the scenes privately?
It was absolutely a genuine offer, Julia, and the reason that we did it in public in the way that we did was because we felt the need for transparency in these negotiations, because, to be frank, there is bad blood between the two parties involved, and we felt that it was best for both our own members, Reform members, and indeed the general public to see these negotiations play out in full in public, because the 5 principles that we have offered Reform, the 5 principles around which we believe the patriotic parties of the right in Britain should be organised, are the bare minimum for restoring Britain. And I noticed, by the way, that yourself and others in the mainstream media have actually routinely failed to mention all 5 of our policy.
I must have mentioned them about 5 times on air yesterday.
Well, many of your colleagues have routinely failed to mention one of the most important ones, I would say the most important one, which is demographic security for the white British people. We're going to become a minority in this country within the next 40 years on present demographic trends. In 2024, only 54% of live births were to white British mothers. This is an existential threat to our nation, and Reform have always denied this.
Why? Why? No. Let me give you a bit more detail around why I'm saying why. I think an awful lot of people in this country, and actually of all skin colours, share a concern about the major demographic changes in this country in terms of people coming from other countries, not speaking our language, not sharing our values of adherence to the law, and integrating, etc., etc. However, I don't think that's got anything to do with anyone's skin colour. So why is that a threat to our country?
White British is a census classification.
Yes, I'm not disputing that.
Yes, so I'm not talking about skin colour, I'm talking about a census classification that includes...
You are talking about
English,
skin colour.
Scottish,
White.
Welsh
The
and
word
Irish.
white. It's a bit of a clue there.
Yes, well, I mean, it's a descriptive category used by
There is an ethnicity that is, English, white, British, white. Yes, I get that. And, going back many centuries, we are and have been always, until about 20 years ago, almost entirely a white nation. I get that. Why is there being fewer births to white British as opposed to, say, black British or brown British people? Why is that a threat to our country?
Well, I think you've just answered that yourself, Julia, and that is that this is a very recent change in our nation's demographics, and an unwelcome change. It is a change that nobody ever voted for. In fact, since modern mass immigration began with the passing of the British Nationality Act in 1948, the British public have routinely voted against mass immigration, particularly from the Third World and former colonies.
But you're talking about immigration.
That's because these are people that are coming from vastly different cultures, vastly different parts of the world, with whom we have very little shared history,
and many others,
and therefore,
Charlie, and many others share those concerns, but you are conflating immigration and white. Yes, I realise that ethnically British people have been white, so they have been. However, there are an awful lot of people who we will live and work alongside, and children go to school alongside, who are not just British, as in they've got a British passport. Their parents were born here. They were born here. They know no other country. They consider themselves completely British. They are British. My grandparents on one side came from Ireland. I consider myself, my father was born here, my mother was born here, I was born here. I consider myself British. People with exactly the same credentials, but maybe their family came from the Caribbean or came from India, but they have lived here 2 or 3 generations. They shared language, values, beliefs, integrated, assimilated generations ago. Why is they having babies? Why is that a threat to this country?
So, Julia, you are here acting as a mouthpiece for the regime that currently governs this country.
Shut up, Charlie. You're embarrassing yourself.
What you're saying is exactly the same thing I've been hearing for my entire life, from primary school to secondary school to university, about what it means to be British, and that is that it is about shared values. This project
Why do you keep mentioning skin colour then?
As I've already said, and as you have acknowledged, white British is a census category used by the government to describe the English, Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish. In other words, the native peoples of the British Isles.
Native, yes, I accept the word, I accept that, but why? But just, you know perfectly well, and with all due respect, I don't think you're as clever as you think you are, that you are constantly conflating the issue of immigration. I've just said to you, there is an issue with immigration and people who are not integrated, but I don't see what that's got to do with skin colour.
What's your definition of integration, Julia?
People, I think I've already said it 2 or 3 times, but people who speak English fluently, who are completely sharing values, belief in the law, you know, equality under the law for women, gay people, I would suggest would be a key value now for the vast majority of Brits. You can marry who you want, you can worship who you want, you don't shut down to it. I would consider queuing, being nice, fairness. I would consider a lot of those to be British values and being integrated.
So if all of the white British people currently in Britain were replaced by Pakistanis and Somalians, all of whom believed in queuing, would Britain be the same as it is now, or would it be different?
You just, OK, yeah, this is...
this is the key question, Julia.
No, it's not the key question. You're making a glib point. You're the one who keeps saying it's about immigration, and then you keep talking about skin colour.
Because, Julia, the question is, are we a people or aren't we? And if we are, then the changing demographics do have a material effect on the future of the country.
Changing demographics do.
I don't want my children to grow up in some effing Lebanon, which is the situation we are rapidly hurtling towards with the massive demographic change that we're experiencing in this country. So, if we are to restore Britain and turn it into a country that is worth living in for young people and old people and all British people, then restoring Britain's demographic security and recognising that the changing demographics is at the root of so much of what is wrong with our country today is absolutely essential. And as you have just demonstrated, yourself, others in the mainstream media, and indeed many of those in Reform of the Conservative Party are not prepared to have this conversation because
I'm perfectly prepared to. I'm not trying to shut down the conversation. I just thought I was having a conversation with you about Restore and Reform. We come back on again another time when we've got more time, when we will debate that in more detail. When we have got more time, we'll make sure we've got it the decent time. But I wanted to ask you. We've got to one question about the subject I wanted to talk to you about, which was this a genuine offer? You said this was a genuine offer. You talked about 5 principles. The trouble is, you know, a referendum on capital punishment isn't a principle. A refusal to allow former Tory cabinet ministers or ministers who defected to reform into government isn't a principle. You're confusing policy with principle. What are the key principles that divide reform and restore as opposed to policy? And why did your leader, Rupert Lowe, I know you've had some he's had some criticism of you very recently about some of your views, probably some of those expressed just now. But why did he put in these 5, you call them principles, most of them aren't, why did he put in one, including you can't have any of your Tory defectors in cabinet? Why did he put that in when you knew perfectly well that was not something Nigel Farage could ever agree to?
Well, the label that we applied to that one was restoring faith in politics, which I would say is a principle. It's a desirable principle.
Policy.
But so many people have lost faith in our system. So many people have checked out. There's a reason that nobody votes anymore, and that's because they feel like voting doesn't make a difference.
People do vote.
In the recent Manchester mayoral by-election,
by-elections for mayoralties have always been very, very low.
OK, so in 2024, 60% of the public voting is... You think that's OK, do you? I mean, in my view, this is a tragedy that people have lost faith in our system because we have one of the most bulletproof systems in the world that has been subverted, yes, in recent decades by malign actors like Tony Blair, but actually the system of parliamentary democracy that we invented is the best in the world. And so restoring faith in that system is essential, and rewarding those who have sold us out in the past when given the opportunity to make real
even
change,
people like Robert Jenrick
is an error.
Even people like Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman who spoke out on those issues while in the Conservative Party.
Well, Robert Jenrick did so when it was politically convenient. He is on the record as defending his decision to, under the cover of night, bring in tens of thousands of Afghans into the country and has celebrated that fact. And so this is not a man that I think should be rewarded with a second opportunity to mislead and ultimately betray the British public.
What do you think the odds are there will be any sort of rapprochement? Because it's not between the two parties, is it, Restore and Reform? Fundamentally, this is actually about 2 massive male egos, Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe.
Well, I think there's every chance that this could happen, because I think that ultimately our members, Reform members and Restore members, do basically agree on 90+% of issues. I think the 5 principles or policies, as you say, that we laid out are things that all Reform voters could get behind. And so the question really is, does Reform have the will, the steel, to actually embrace these policies and principles that we feel are essential to restoring the nation?
Do you think it's a bit rich, though? I mean, you've got Reform, interestingly, a new YouGov poll today we've been talking about has just put Reform inching just back ahead of Labour. It's all within the margin of error. But, Reform on 23%, they'd been at a much higher mark before. Your party's on 4%, yet you performed better in the local by-elections lately and indeed the mayoralty in Manchester. But, you are a minnow in terms of membership, in terms of mass appeal, in terms of name recognition, even if your leader, when it comes to Reform and Nigel Farage. Why do you think it's appropriate for, Rupert Lowe to think that he can call the shots?
Well, Julia, that YouGov poll that was out today did not actually prompt Restore Britain. So that 4% who are polling for us have gone out of their way to name us as the party that they are supporting, which demonstrates a certain level of enthusiasm. Base. And as you say, we have been doing increasingly well in recent by-elections. And if Andy Burnham keeps his word, there won't be a general election for a number of years. And a great deal can happen in that time. And as more members of the public get to learn our platform and indeed our leader Rupert Lowe, more and more are coming on board. And that I see no reason to think that will stop, because the agenda that we're offering, the agenda that we have extended to Reform, is the one that the British people want and the one that the country needs. Right.
Charlie, the time is against us. We're going to have to leave this. Campaigns Director and Spokesman at Restore Britain. I do hope genuinely it's a genuine offer. I'd like you to come back on so we can discuss some of the issues you've raised in more depth. I hope you'd say yes to that. Even though I'm a mouthpiece for the mainstream media, of course. 12:48 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Up next, going to be talking to former Chief Inspector at Ofsted, Conservative peer Baroness Amanda Spielman, about, well, the claims that Lucy Powell, the new Education Secretary, is dumbing down our schools. Oh, no, not again. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning. So good afternoon. Welcome back to show 12:51. Well, that was quite lively. Definitely want to get Charlie Downs back on, have a longer conversation about I mean, ethno-nationalism, I suppose. But there we are. You may disagree with what, you may agree with him. Who knows? We'll get your thoughts on that next time we have him on. Right now, then, let's talk about dumbing down our schools. Because, yeah, Labour in power, so what a surprise, that's what they're going to do. We can have a lot of battles over what Michael Gove did over lockdown. But one thing he did do that was absolutely brilliant and wonderful was actually restoring some rigour in academia when it came to our schools when he was Education Secretary. And as a former comp girl myself, hugely grateful to him for that. But Lucy Powell, the new new Education Secretary, says one-size-fits-all academic approach focusing on English, science and history has led to children being branded a failure. That's why we've got 1 million young people who are not in education, employment or training, the NEETs. That's what she's blaming it on. Is she just going to dumb down our schools to make subjects easier so kids don't fail even more than they do already? Let's talk about this with Baroness Amanda Spielman. She's a Conservative peer and former Chief Inspector at Ofsted. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Julie.
I mean, I'm genuinely very worried by a number of things that Lucy Powell has said since becoming Education Secretary, and some things she said in the recent past, certainly in, you know, the last sort of 6, 7, 10 years, where she doesn't seem to be a big fan of teaching kids, you know, spelling and grammar and a bit of rigour when it comes to our education. And yet we know, as a result of those Michael Gove reforms to actually improve our schools, we saw a massive run-up the international league tables for schools in England because children were finally being required to actually, I know this is a mad idea, know something.
Absolutely. And strong literacy and strong maths are, of course, the two most important vocational skills we can give anybody. So right there to deplore getting rigour into English teaching is utterly bizarre. And more generally, she stacked up a whole series of misapprehensions, wrong assumptions. But the signal is very, very clearly to let lots of children start opting out from any sort of academic rigour much earlier in education. And there are two arguments that I think bump into each other here. There's one which very much is the vibe in much of the education sector, that education should be all about fairness and caring and being kind to anybody who suffers from any kind of disadvantage, and it's not fair to expect them to work hard or to achieve. And that bumps into something else that probably sits more on the right politically, which is quite a sort of narrow utilitarian conception of education, that once you've got the sort of elementary education in place, it should, for most people, it should just be about getting them into the workforce.
Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between, there is a fine, strong aspirational vision that we've done so much to work towards over the last 15 years, where we're recognised internationally for how well we're doing across the board, not just with the brightest and most economically advantaged, but for everybody. We've got study groups coming here from other countries to see what we've done and how we did it.
Yeah, I mean, and that certainly wasn't the case some years ago when everything was being, dumbed down. And, I remember talking to my parents, who both working class kids who went to grammar schools, and explaining how, no, we really were not taught grammar in my com. At no point have any recollection. I learned anything I learned somehow, just from reading books myself, how to put sentences together. They don't teach us stuff. But this is a fascinating thing. There's a lot of talk about how, there are kids who just don't do, kids, friends of mine, and just not academic. They don't enjoy that sort of schooling. They struggle with it, and they'd actually be really good at technical stuff and practical things. They'd probably make great employees. And this idea that they should do more of that. And that was, by the way, what the plan was supposed to have been when we originally had grammar schools, and what Germany did so successfully. But the idea that if you're teaching kids practical schools, that being able to add up properly, being able to use maths, being able to use English accurately and read well, that these are not skills that would also be wanted by an employer is crazy.
Well, indeed, it's just not an either or. There is a very strong correlation between doing well academically and getting and staying in good employment. They don't sit in opposition to each other. But a lot of people make this a false binary that it's one or the other. The countries we most admire, places like Germany and Switzerland, they do allow people to start a technical track relatively young, so 13 or 14. But if you look at what's in those technical tracks, it's mostly a broad general education. You might be between 14 and 16, you might be doing 4 hours a week in that technical strand. And of course, we let children do just as much of that. You can do, within the Progress 8 framework, you can do 3 GCSEs or alternative qualifications that are anything you choose that your school offers. So children can already do a programme that's up to 8 hours a week of technical and vocational.
So exactly, it's most, whenever they talk about we need to do this, it's already happening. The thing I always find frustrating is so much of it's about, but the kids need to be enjoying it to learn. You know, good teachers can make anything interesting, but also most of us accept, and as parents and when we were kids, you're not necessarily going to enjoy every second of your life. You won't necessarily enjoy every minute of your job or every minute of school, and there's stuff that you need to learn because it's just useful to learn and it's just good grounding for life. And this idea that kids have to be permanently entertained and loving what they're doing, otherwise someone's doing something wrong. Not a good life lesson.
And also, you get more motivated if you learn, and that includes learning stuff you didn't know you were interested in.
Exactly.
You don't necessarily feel is essential to your life, but you still get a boost and it motivates you to carry on learning. It's a virtuous circle that we should be reinforcing as much as we can.
Absolutely. Amanda Spillman, Baroness Spillman, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much. Tom Slater, again, I get so frustrated with this idea that, a lot of these people, you know, being failed by school. Yeah, let's fail them even more then.
No, and it's because of the failure of standards, even the Gove reforms, which are very welcome and obviously sent us up various international league tables in science and maths and so on. There's still a hell of a way to go to even make the state education system as rigorous as it was a couple of generations ago.
Well, usually the people who are spouting all this nonsense are people who went to grammar schools themselves, keep that quiet on the left, or private or top private schools, which I find so frustrating because they just you know, they've never sat in a comp school where, you know, you're just not actually getting taught some really basic stuff. I think kids shouldn't. I'm very old-fashioned. I'm a big fan of being taught facts. I'm listening to a podcast on history. I've got a history grade AA level. You know, we weren't taught. I wasn't taught anything. I didn't know there'd been an English Civil War.
Yeah,
we didn't come up in the curriculum.
Exactly, and also
no one bothered to teach us.
And the kind of spoon feeding that's gone on more recently. I mean, certainly when I was going through the state education system, you could do well and still not learn very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And get an A star.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom said it's been a pleasure having your company. Voice of sanity, always good to get you in. And now we got, well, is he a voice of sanity? Yeah, he is. Mark, you're not sure. Mark Dolan's here.
I'm a rock of sense.
Oh.
Yes, indeed. Eventually, there's going to be a talk at Mount Rushmore. You'll be on it, Julia, with your best side. I've seen the pictures. Myself and Kevin O'Sullivan, one